suppose it's about time for us to get started. I guess. I suppose. Hello, friends. How are you guys doing? How's it going today? I'm doing alright. I'm super tired today. I'm like really low energy. So I'm kind of glad that we're doing Scarlet Hollow as opposed to Deathmark tonight. Because I'm just here. I'm just vibing, you know? No, I'm very excited about this game, and I can't wait. It's been out for about a week now. I think they released it sometime earlier last week. And I am so stoked. Right? I'm really glad that you managed to, like, A, play it yourself, but also catch up on, like, the video, Fruity, because, like, oof. But I'm really glad you got to play it yourself as well. Yeah, I'm so stoked about this, and I'm super glad to see Jody here. Oh, an arcade, hello! This is acceptable and understandable. You write your game stuff. It's a visual novel today, so, like, I mean, the art's really pretty, and I would highly recommend looking at it, but you can just listen to me narrate everything for you. But we'd love to see you here. Welcome. I guess we could do, like, I wanted to wait a little bit longer in case other people were gonna show up, but you know what? We've been live for almost 8 minutes. So I guess we can go ahead and, like, recap what happened last time. Like I said, I remember a lot of, like, the bigger points. And of course I remember all of the animals' names. But other than that, I couldn't tell you anything. But I think basically our character is in town, into the town of Scarlet Hollow, which I think is what the town's called, I believe. Already off to a great start. I know I didn't talk to the animals. In my defense, that patch wasn't out yet. I didn't get to talk to the animals because I wasn't able to. I plan on going through again and playing at some point just to, like, see the different outcomes for myself, but I didn't want to do that just yet, because I have imported our save from the first episode to the second one, since they were technically two different. The way they released it was odd, but we will be continuing on from, like, our previous save, which will be exciting. But no, so we're in this town visiting our cousin because their aunt passed away. Our cousin's mother, our aunt, died, and so we're there as, like, emotional support, I believe. But our cousin doesn't like us, I don't think. Yeah, our cousin's a real grumpus, but, like, also, like, a big mood. I love our cousin. But we've made friends with some of the locals. I do remember Stella, but and I think that's her name. I remember what she looks like. The only reason I remember her is because she's got the pug, Gretchen. But our cousin also has a cat named Frou-Frou? Frou-Frou? Frou-Frou. Gretchen is the pug, because it's a perfect pug name. I remember only because I thought, like, when you first hear him, I would imagine that the dog would be named Stella, and you know, their owner would be, Gretchen. But because of that, it's the reverse. I don't know why my brain remembers it that way, but I do. Gretchen is a potato! Gretchen is perfect. But we've been hanging out with Stella. Stella is a YouTuber, who goes on cryptid hunts a lot. We ended up joining them for a cryptid hunt of some sort, and we ended up finding terrible animals with tumors all over them. Right? They're both very good. We love them both. But we yeah, so we found like all those like sick animals, ran into another local, like the grumpy farmer man who was looking for his chickens. I want to say he was looking for his chickens. We found one of the chickens, and it was also tumory and gross and awful. And something bad happened, and I do remember we had to choose either to try and stop the guy from shooting his gun or something, or grab Gretchen, because Gretchen was getting ready to run away, and we grabbed Gretchen, and then, oops, old farmer man died. Oops! You know that feeling when you move to a new town, and then you kill the old farmer on accident? You have to get the flush. Yeah, that's right. Also, what is... I don't want talking. Don't talk at me, music. Yeah. You either grab the flashlight or stop Gretchen. And you gotta get Gretchen. That is the correct choice. There are no other choices. So good. I'm glad we agreed on that, Fruity. Yeah, you're basically, I assume it's a choice of either do you want the dog or the man to live, and obviously the dog. But then we got chased by those weird lumpy things. Just some terrible, awful monsters that were just blobs, basically. Blobs with arms and legs. And we ran into Stella's friend, whose name I don't remember. But their grandmother, apparently practices witchcraft, I believe? Regardless, she gave off, like, big crone vibes, and I was there for it, and kind of filled us in on, the fact that, like, I think the town is cursed. I don't remember the details of it. I'm sure we'll go over some of it, because I do remember we ended up going home and calling Stella to, like, let her know that we made it back, and then just passed the fuck out. Picture a typical knife grandma. The perfect kind. The perfect kind. But that's, like, essentially the recap, I think. For you just watched it. Am I missing anything, like, big and important? I think those are, like, the main highlights. I know that the funeral is still coming up, but we haven't attended yet. Like, it hasn't happened yet, I don't believe. For our aunt. But I also don't know that I don't think we told anyone about old man Jenkins getting shot. Oh, there was the weird peanut guy on the bus. Forgot about Peanut Man. Okay, cool. So I guess those are the main highlights. I do remember that super precious person in the diner. Is their name like Avery or something? Lady with the dog called the cops for me, even though I said not to. They told me not to leave town. I don't think I got the cops involved, like, at all. Which, you know, they're not gonna do anything anyway, but I guess let's go ahead and, like, start this. Okay, cool, thank you. Thank you for letting me know. Let's get this game going. Why are you not full screen? No, I need you to be full screen. Hold on a second. Preferences? Full screen. There we go. That's better. It's good music. There it is. Show it for 5 minutes and go to bed. Yeah, sounds about right. Alright, so like I said, we do have, let's just continue. Let's just continue. I feel like that's very loud. Just a second to turn that down a smidge. Does that sound okay to you guys? Oh, that good art! I will give, I don't know that she's here right now, but Mayor Emmy did give me a copy of this game, so big shout out to them for getting this for me. I super duper appreciate it. Travis, hello, welcome. Sounds good? Fantastic. Alright, I guess let's just do this. Let's just get into this. I've got my vitamin water, I got some soda, we're ready to go. It's just reading, it's all reading. Love to see it, but I hate to draw it. The cross hatching. It's so good! No, the art in this game is phenomenal. Like, it's so pretty. I think the artist's name is Abby Howard, I believe. I think she's done comics, and a few other, like, big projects, but this is, like, I can't say for certain because I don't remember, but I think this is, like, one of her first, like, projects that she's done, not on her own, but that she's, like, led on her own, which is super exciting. It's so good. It's so good. So yeah, this is immediately after our first save, and it's, you open your eyes. The sun has risen, the birds are singing, you're still alive, and for now, you are safe. For now. Your gaze wanders across the room to the window and the woods beyond. You wonder if the monsters are lurking there right now, just beyond the trees, ready to pounce as you leave the crumbling estate. Oh, right, the whole, like, it's essentially like a manor, isn't it? And it's, like, gigantic and huge and ridiculous. And, like, constantly falling apart. I know that there was a section of the mansion that we tried to get to at one point, but I think it was locked, and or our cousin was like, don't go there, don't do that. Yeah, it's super broken. It's not great. Also give me just a moment to change something because I noticed one of my settings was off. I thought it was just the one cat. I don't remember if there are multiple cats. I remember the one, the black cat that's just super angry. One mean French cat. Yeah. Frou-frou. Good cat. Good cat. Alright, I think I fixed the setting that was broken. Alright. I mean, this is valid. Definitely pretend that there are many. There's also that really pretty, like, it's overgrown, but it's really gorgeous, like, garden out and back. No one believes me that I can talk to animals even though I tell everyone I meet. They're probably just like, that's nice, sweetie, and pat you on the head, all patronizing and awful. Alright. A familiar unease settles into your gut, tingling into a knot of anxiety, wriggling as the events of last night play out in your head. You can't help but remember Duke, slumped against a tree, pieces of him scattered across the clearing. Is that old man Jenkins? Duke? You're not sure if you'll ever feel okay again after what you've seen, but you can't stay in bed forever. Fucking watch me. Hunger pulls you from the clammy depths of the mattress. Ooh, we gotta check on the possum! The hiss. You open the drawers to check in on the little possum you met yesterday. Oh god, he's still there. That's nice. Pat the little man's head! You reach in to pat the little man's. He immediately plays dead. You're perfect and I love you. You leave him to his theatrics and close the drawer. Oh, I love him. Let's poke around the closet. Boop 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 boop. Haunted doll watch. Great. The doll didn't move during the night. Maybe it isn't haunted after all. Though after everything you went through yesterday, that's hardly a consolation. Ah, yes, the North American possum. The opossum. Possums have fingerless gloves when you think about it. do. Oh, I love it. Oh, I love it. Can we get them some, like, some eyeliner and maybe just, like, dye a strip on their head? They gotta be super cool, right? Oh, I love it. We turn back to the rest of the room. Look out the window. What the hell is this? Creep towards the window, careful not to be seen by whatever might be lurking in the garden. For a second you thought you saw movement. Could have been an animal. Could have been something else. Whatever it was, it's gone now. Okay, I'm glad. I'm glad I saw that. It looked odd. Maybe you'll head out there and investigate after you finished waking up. Let's text Stella. It's probably a good idea to check in with your new friend. Can't imagine she's holding up very well. Send a picture of a tired cat you found on the internet. Yes. Sorry. Look at that kitty. Might take her a minute to get back to you. In the meantime, let's get dressed and head to the kitchen. It's time to start your day. It is a perfect day. There's the cat. Look at how angry. Look at how angry they are. Oh. You're back in the kitchen. Frou-Frou's eyes you from her favorite spot on the counter. Devo. Oh, look at the cat. Look at the chins. You're back in the kitchen. Cat eyes you from her favorite spot on the counter. Excuse me, ma'am, but may I pet you? Part of you hopes that flattery might win her over, as silly as that may seem. You are, after all, talking to a cat. Frou-Frou merely flicks her tail faster. Doesn't look promising. Hey, Tabitha! That's her cousin's name. You sure took your time getting up. It's a perfect game. It's like 8 a.m. I watched a man die last night. There are monsters in the woods. We need to leave. I had a really rough night. Can you cut me some slack? I've had a really rough night. Can you cut me some slack? A man died right in front of me. And those woods are full of actual monsters. I didn't... Look me! I forgot I made my name my name. But look me! I didn't want to share all of that information. I just... Tabitha, like Tabby Cat. Grumpy Tabby Cat. She'd probably hate it if we called her that, though. It's frankly a miracle that I'm even up this early. I don't know what you saw, but if someone died, I'm sure I would have heard about it. Don't let Stella get you all worked up over this. She has that effect on people. Anyways, I'm running late, so listen up. I wanted to make sure I relayed this message in person in case you decided to ignore my texts again. Right! Tabitha was messaging us, like, I think during all of the stuff that was going on, and we, like, missed all of them, and so she's mad at us because we didn't get back to her immediately, but we did see a man die. And I think she and Stella were friends at some point? I don't remember entirely. But, yeah. I don't want any repeats of last night. From now on, no running around in the woods after dark. It's dangerous out there, and not because of monsters. They were friends way back, but she's kind of a recluse now. Okay, I couldn't remember if it was just like... I mean, Tabitha definitely just kind of sticks to herself. But I couldn't remember if there was, like, some, like, big falling out, or if they just kind of grew apart. So thank you for that. You could fall down a cliff. You could get stuck in a hidden cave somewhere. You could get lost in the woods and never be found. Just because nothing happens here doesn't mean it's safe. And just because Stella spends a lot of time in the woods, it doesn't mean she'll keep you out of trouble. Oh, I know. Dog lady says they just stopped taking it out. Okay. Yeah, so Tabitha just kind of you know, just stayed at home always. Never came out. It's okay. We still love her. I want you home by sunset from here on out. You're not my real mom! Ooh. Ooh. What's up with you and Stella? We just have a history, that's all. I don't need to explain myself to you. Okay. Can I hang out with you today? I don't want to be by myself. At the mines? No. You don't understand what happened last night was real. Can we just say, I'm sorry about last night? Because I think that's probably why she's so upset. I'm sorry about last night. I had no idea what was going to happen, and I didn't think I'd worry you like that. Good. Glad we're on the same page. That smile, though! Tabitha. I'm late enough as it is. I'm going to work, and I expect to see you here at sunset. It was real. We had a moment. Was it a date? No. No, Tabitha's our cousin. That's weird. Tabitha and I are becoming best friends now, though! Tabitha takes a few steps towards the door. Sunset. Cousin huffily exits the kitchen. Her footsteps fade down the hall, ending in the characteristic creak, then slam of the front door as it opens and closes behind her. Once again, you were the only human in the estate. I don't think Tabitha's my best friend. Well, if you constantly pestered her... No wonder. I've kind of just let her do her thing from what I remember. Like, I want to say that I, like, told her that I wanted to hang out, but I was also like, no pressure, it's cool, I get needing your space, I'm here if you need me, what do I eat? There's only PB&J's here. There's so much peanut butter and jelly. That was that one! Sorry. I complimented the house a bunch and I'm a good liar. I'd much rather say a smooth talker. Character's very observant and wanted to point out all the broken garbage. I mean, there's a lot to fix in this house. I think is there a way to check what stats I took? I don't think so. You always get the lie option, but it's different if you have the street smarts perk. Oh, okay. I mean, that makes sense. Yeah, I don't think I can see. I want to say I took... I mean, obviously I took street smarts. But I think I also took, like, the mystical one. Yeah! Perfect. Beautiful. I stop constantly to remind myself how good of a liar I am. I'm using it for good, I think. Probably. A text from Stella? I always gotta choose the mystic option. Anytime I can be even just Malkavian adjacent, I'm gonna do it. It's nice to have someone who knows what's going on. Bless Fruity, right, though? Like I said, like, I remember, like, bits and pieces of it, but having somebody who has, like, all of this information super fresh, just perfect. It was optional homework, but you went above and beyond. Plus 2 extra credit points for Fruity. Stella sent us an image. This is just how Stella and I communicate now. We just send this picture over and over again, but with various crops and, like, various edits, but it's just this picture. Right? Same. It's another tired cat. I hope you're holding up okay, or as good as you can with all the stuff we saw last night. I was up most of the night on cryptid forums. No real answers yet. I'm at the library now if you want to join. Hell yeah! I have scones! Hell yeah! I mean, I'd have just come and hung out with you anyway. Stella, is Gretchen gonna be there? I need to know if there's the potato. That's really what I'm here for. Be there in a bit. I'm still waking up. And that's that. Time to start your day. Gotta eat some food. Make a PB&J. Look at that glorious sandwich. Sure, Stella might have scones at the library, but scones are later. PB&J is now. You quickly scrape together the ingredients and gobble up a delicious breakfast. Oh yeah, while I'm thinking about it, we do have, we're still doing our cosplay stream community challenge, so if people want to contribute points to that, do it now. Me trying to stay on top of everything. Fruity, thank you. I think I also added at least one channel point option. That would be fairly, you know, on point for this game. To choose the voice option, excuse me while I just burp at y'all. Obviously, try and keep it appropriate, but, yeah, for reading streams, y'all can tell me what kind of voice you want for a certain character. So yeah. It is a lot of power. It's so much power. I think it's the most expensive thing on there, which shouldn't matter, because I think a lot of you just have points to spare. But hey. Everyone's gonna be a pirate? Oh no, what have we done? And that's that. Let's go investigate the garden, because I want to know who that person in the garden was. As your eyes wander to the garden door, you shudder, remembering the brief glimpse of something you saw from your upstairs window. The pretty garden! I don't remember the leaves moving! This was, I mean, we played this back in November, so, I mean, they very well could have. But that, I feel like that's a new thing. I love it, though. It was probably just a raccoon, but the uncertainty of what you saw gnaws at you and compels you to investigate, if only to prove that it was nothing. At the very least, you don't see anything now. Investigate further? You wander further into the garden, trying to pinpoint the spot where the thing had been lurking, if indeed there had been a thing to begin with. Take it all in. The garden is peaceful, but undeniably eerie. Here, more than anywhere else, you're surrounded by the ghosts of what this place used to be. A greenhouse sits in the midst of the overwhelming greenery, unreachable from years of neglect, its glass clouded and cracked. Statues reach out from within seas of weeds, as if begging to be rescued. I am going to... Ooh, that's the wrong one. I'm gonna move all of our stuff real quick. So I'm not necessarily covering up all the text. I think most of it was readable. Maybe I'll just make myself a little smaller. Yeah, that's better. Alright. Excuse me while I just play around with the overlays. And most strikingly, behind a pair of rusted metal gates at the very peak of the mountain sits a graveyard. You can just make out a few of the headstones, the Scarlet name carved deep and proud into their faces. You notice what a good view someone would have had of your window if they stood where you're standing right now. Why did we leave the door open, by the way? Seems a little, not great. Crouched down, pushing aside the greenery to examine the soft earth. A boot print. A big boot print. And what looks like some kind of viscera. Is it Duke? Did Duke get up? Your thoughts turn to the specter from the night before. You snap a quick photo, just in case it comes in handy later. Let's keep it to ourselves for now. You keep it to yourself for now. No need to cause any worry just yet. I'd rather talk to Stella first about whatever she's looking into. and then bring it up, you know? You head back inside. Time to figure out what to do with the rest of your day. Let's go to town. The walk back to town is much less pleasant today than it was yesterday, when you didn't yet know that the woods were full of monsters and strange men who know your name. You stare anxiously into the darkness between the trees, searching for any signs of movement, but the woods are still, at least for now. Continue down the path. The unintended mountains, sprawling for miles in every direction, now feel less like beautiful scenery and more like the walls of a cage. Your phone buzzes in your pocket. Look who I found at library! Said she was up all night thinking about the video, heading you to a group text. Kanika, that's her name. I'm only here because it's quieter than the store, or was, lol, and I'm trying to figure out what animal that could be. I don't buy into this harbinger of doom stuff. We know that animals, or what animals they are. They're ditchlings, and they are harbingers of doom. Right, little gray blobbies. Sounds like they're having fun. Can't wait to solve this mystery. Almost back to town. Continue down the path. You make it to town in one piece. No creatures jumped out at you. No scary men blocked your path. The sight of other people is comforting, helping you forget the things you've witnessed as if they happened to someone else. It's the person from the diner. And isn't that Kanika's grandma? Oh, hey, Kayshurrr. Avery, that's their name. We were just talking about you. I stopped by Sybil's to pick up her new tea blend, and, well, you're the biggest thing to come into town since the coal mine. Folks have been absolutely buzzing about you. You went out with Stella last night, right? Did something happen out there? She barely even waved when she walked by. Duke had a hunting accident. We just got some really good footage. It's all... I don't want to tell everyone about Duke being dead, because I think we all just sort of agreed that we wouldn't mention it, despite me having mentioned to Tabitha. Coal mines don't come into town. They're always there. Just secret. Secret coal mines. Imagine the monsters lurking there. Yeah, we'll just say we got some really good footage. We just got some really good footage is all. Now that is juicy. Tell you what, I'm on break for the next half hour. How about you swing by the diner? Winnie can fix you some of Sybil's new blend and try to calm your nerves. It's chaga and lemon balm. It does wonders to relieve stress and tension. And if you want to spill the beans on about what happened, I'm all ears. Don't make me choose between Stella and Avery! Anyways, it's up to you. See you around, Kayshurrr. See you, Sybil. Take care now, Avery. Okay, good. Okay, good. You can't... I just got the achievement. Alright, then. Keep your secrets. Dead. I see you're a private person. I can respect that. You never know how someone might respond to hearing the truth of what you encountered last night. Better get back to it myself. Glad I was able to catch you this morning. If only to see how you were holding up. Sybil. Please don't hesitate to stop by if I can be of any help. What aren't you telling me, old woman? Oh, these are all such good options. Well, not all of them, but... Do we go street smart or mystic with it? Let's go mystic. I know you can sense what I sense here. How are you so calm? Don't mistake my calm demeanor for complacency. We all have our parts to play in this. I trust that you and Stella have what it takes to get to the bottom of things. So sorry to cut our conversation short, but I've got things that need tending to. Stay safe, Kayshurrr, and God bless. God has nothing to do with this place, ma'am. Probably have a bit of time before you're needed at the library. Well, if I got time, swing by the diner. Gotta go say hi to Avery! Look at how perfect they are! The diner's a little quiet today, but the air is still heavy with the tantalizing smell of breakfast. Warn the patrons of the danger. That's a bad idea. Also, look at Avery! Hi, friends! Let's go talk to them. Slide into the booth across from Avery. Hold on a second. I gotta... Ooh, that's wrong. I keep getting achievements, and I need you to see them because they're perfect. Okay. I just got coffee date. Is that what this is? Slide into the booth across from Avery. Also, the soundtrack for this game is so good. Hey there, stranger. Before you can exchange words, Winnie sidles up and a fresh mug of tea in hand. Heard you might need this. The answer to 29 down is oink, by the way. What? But the clue is pen sound. How is that a sound a pen makes? Wait. Pen like pig pen? Are you kidding me? How was I supposed to guess that? I don't know why you even bother with those things. They're just gonna frustrate you. It's just something to do to fill the time, but maybe I should switch to Sudoku. Winnie leaves Avery contemplating daily newspaper puzzles, returning to her seat behind the counter. So, what the hell happened last night? You can tell me. I won't judge. They're already giving me a flirt option, and this is dangerous. It's both clever and bad. But they're not wrong. Oink. It is absolutely 100% a coffee date now. It's confirmed. Also, Avery is such a liar. Avery's totally gonna judge. I hope not, because I love them. Also, look at these silly pictures in the background. The faces. The faces. No, let's try our tea. Oh, we get a mystical aspect on this. Okay. You take a gentle sip of your tea. It's bitter and earthy, a flavor profile enjoyed only by the healthiest of beverages. Oh, not a lot of folks take to chaga so quickly. It's a fungus that grows on birch trees around here. It's supposed to be super healthy, but it definitely makes for a challenging drink. Colored me impressed. Let's explore. What if... Sorry. I keep freaking out about this flirt option. Yeah, I could tell you about last night, but what if you don't believe me? I'm not here to judge, I'm here to listen. Okay, but like... Winnie is judging me. I guess we could chat about last night, but I actually came here because I wanted to get to know you. Oh yeah? Alright. What do you want to know? Have you lived here your whole life? I moved here from Scarlet, gosh, 3 years ago now? Maybe a little more. Lost track. Aunt Winnie offered me a place to stay and a job, and who was I to pass on that sort of generosity? To be honest, it still feels like I just moved in. Practically everyone apart from the Cole folks grew up in this town, so it's like I'm their perpetual new kid. Don't get me wrong, folks here are plenty polite and friendly, but there's a shared history I'll never be a part of. Do you regret moving here? I don't think I have the choice to have second thoughts. I'm not going anywhere without Aunt Winnie, and there's no way she's leaving this place. Why'd you leave Scarlet, if you don't mind me asking? No, that's cool. I was having some education disputes with my folks. They had thoughts on how my life was supposed to go, and I had other plans. It wasn't great. especially since I was still stuck under their roof. When my aunt heard about it, she offered me a job and a place to stay, and the rest is history. I get it. Fell out of place the whole time I've been here. Folks on the whole have been plenty friendly, but life here is so different than what I'm used to. It's hard to explain, but I just don't feel like I belong. Exactly. There are worse ways to be, but I'm not sure I'll ever entirely feel like I belong here. I want to tell! We're gonna tell. Alright, I think I'm ready to talk about what happened last night. Oh yeah? I also really enjoy just the little pictures of the achievements. They're very good. You spill the beans. Glad to have someone to talk to about the horrors you've witnessed. Wow, that is some heavy stuff. No wonder Stella seemed distant. Monsters in the woods? I may not have lived here long, but I've never heard of anything like that happening around these parts. Can't say I like the thought of it. I mean, we gotta go with the specific options, right? Whatever's coming for the place, I can feel it converging on me. Get to the bottom of things, I promise. Jeez, that's rough. Good luck, Kayshurrr. Oh man, looks like my shift is starting. I hope you're doing a bit better. Maybe the Chongus had a chance to start working its magic. I'm gonna keep my ears open for you. The diner is where everyone comes to gossip, so I hear a lot about what goes on around here. I'll let you know if anyone mentions those monsters or anything else strange or unusual. Avery is perfect and I love them. I love them so much! Avery slips out of the booth, giving a friendly half wave before disappearing into the back. You leave the diner, ready to continue your day. Do we need to swing by the general store? I mean, we might as well, right? This is your first time seeing the general store in the light of day. A young man sits at the table by the register, too preoccupied with his phone to care that you stepped in. You should leave town! I mean, let's go ahead and introduce ourselves. I think... Hi, I'm Kayshurrr. I just got to town yesterday. Yeah, I know. Mom told me. What's your name? Miles. So if I wanted to buy something here, do I talk to you or Miles sighs? I guess, yeah, Kanika decided to skip work today, so of course whatever plans I had didn't matter. Just take the chips, I don't care. Wouldn't that be stealing? If Kanika cares about running this place right, she can hire someone else and let me live my life. She inherited the store, and I don't want to keep getting suckered into working here just because I'm her brother. We make most of our money on bulk orders anyways. Bag of chips doesn't make a difference. I'm gonna tell Kanika about that. I'm not a narc. I'm paying for my chips. I insist. I'm not ringing you up. Take them or leave them. I'm not gonna steal. Have it your way. I'm just gonna keep pestering them. What you doing on your phone? Games. You probably haven't heard of them. I'm done here. You turn and leave the general store. You can talk to animals in this game, right? That makes the stuffed animals on the wall have even worse implications. I haven't been able to talk to animals, but I think you have to start like the game at, or I don't know how the animal talking shtick goes. There, yeah, Fruity can talk to animals. I can't. I'm not that cool. I wish I were that cool. Anyone can talk to animals. The trick is getting them to talk back. Instead of being a wizard, you could be besties with a cool dog. I want to be besties with a cool dog. That's probably what I'll do. I mean, probably. That is what I will do for the next time I play. I gotta be Potato Gretchen's friends! Speaking of... There. Is that Gretchen? You enter the former town hall. What the heck is up with this picture? Like, what's going on here? Why are these children so cheery? It's just the Wicker Man. You know what? Probably. Fair enough. Alright, so we enter the former town hall. What once must have been a stately foyer has since been converted into rows of shelves. Meeting rooms and offices long ago gave way to assorted reference collections and reading areas. I'm gonna turn my fan on real quick. Hang on a second. Hopefully that's not too annoying as far as the microphone is concerned. And if it is, well, too bad. Also, look! There's a cat on the counter! I love it! Is it fine? Is it really? Alright, Oh, hey, you made it! It is! I'm gonna settle in with Stella and Kanika. Genuinely fun this time of year. Oh, fantastic. Oh, good. You head over to Stella and Kanika's table and settle in. It's a fairly quiet fan, all things considered. But I'm always so scared that my microphone is gonna pick everything up. Look at my perfect friends! Also, look at that potato! Oh, I love Gretchen! Let me pet you! Oh, perfect. Do you want I can make the breathing worse. Right? Just the terrible pug breathing. Just I need this dog. Also, yeah, dog in the library. Okay. Everything is fine. It's the perfect pug noises. You made it. I'm glad you could join us. Also, I thought this was cheese. I think it's supposed to be the scones, though. Morning, Kayshurrr. You look tired. Oof. If only you knew. Snitch on Miles! Nah, I'm not gonna do that. Kanika, you can't just tell someone they look tired. I'm still amped up on adrenaline, actually. I've never done a Scooby-Doo before. Some creepy old guy with a real estate scheme and a bad costume is at least a little more believable than monsters and curses. All we need now is for Gretchen to start talking. Sorry. Look at Gretchen! This dog is perfect! Oh my god. Anyways, I guess we should get started. Before you dig in, you remember the boot print you found in the garden? Yeah, no, we'll show it to them now. Hey, before we dig in, I Found something in the garden this morning. You hold up your phone and show Kanika and Stella the photo you took in the garden. Also, look at how concerned Gretchen is about existence. These prints were in the bushes with a clear line of sight to my window. Dang, that's creepy. Are you okay? What in the world is that liquid around it? It looks like pus. Do you think it's Wayne? Wait! Didn't we get accosted by some dude after we left Sybil's? Quick, Fruity! Wasn't there some, like, I want to say a homeless dude, but I don't think he was. I think he was just a strange man. Yes, weird man. Okay, is that Wayne? Wizard Grandma told him off. You go, Wizard Grandma. Beautiful. Can't say I'm thrilled with the thought of someone watching my room. Those boots are too big to be Tabitha's. Let's be like, let's consider everything here. Definitely. Do you think it could be that creep we saw outside of the general store last night? He knew your name and those boot prints match up with the mining getup. Whoa, apparently I missed a lot last night, huh? You're not talking about Wayne, are you? That guy keeps coming to my mom's tea room. I think there's something really wrong with him. Yeah, we are. I wonder if there's any connection between that guy and what happened in the woods last night. Like, what? I mean, I don't have anything specific, but we do have that whole prophecy of impending doom angle to explore, and this photo is weird. Can't stop thinking about those splatters on the ground. Whoever left those prints is sick. Maybe it's from the creatures you encountered. Who is this? Hey, the strangers. And literal stranger. Remain silent. Oh, we'll introduce ourselves. Hey, I'm Kayshurrr, Tabitha's cousin. I'm in town for the funeral. Oh, I should have known you were Scarlet. You look so much like Vivian. Not that I knew her very well. I was still a little kid when she left. But that Scarlet resemblance, it's, strong. I'm Oscar Goody, I don't know how to pronounce this last name, and I don't want to butcher it. Gutierrez? Chief Librarian, and only librarian. Oscar's amazing. He practically built this library from scratch. Yeah, I'm a little jealous of what the kids around here got to grow up with. They don't know how good they have it. Back when I was in elementary school, all the library had was a couple of shelves of boring books donated by old people. Y'all are too kind. But speaking of kids, have either of you seen Rosalina around town? I don't want to be a helicopter dad, but she didn't come home last night, and I wanted to make sure she isn't getting into trouble out there. You know the crowd she hangs around with. They're good kids at heart. I'm sure they're just up at the old Maxwell place doing teen stuff. I went up there plenty of times in my day, but I'll be sure to keep my eyes peeled. What's the old Maxwell place? It's this great old abandoned spot. We used to hang out there when we were teens. Can't believe I used to be so reckless. The floors were like Swiss cheese. I should really have a talk with Rosalina when she gets home. Kids are smarter than you think. She can take care of herself. Might not want to let her run off like that anymore, though. It's not as safe as it usually is around here. Is that so? Kanika's right. There's some weird stuff going on out in the woods. It's actually why we came in today. Have you ever heard of creatures called ditchlings? They're a type of cryptid that shows up around places on the brink of disaster. They kind of look like the Pillsbury Doughboy. Or if the Pillsbury Doughboy was a creepypasta. Kanika's mom told us about them last night after seeing some footage we got in the woods. Ditchlings? Doesn't ring a bell. Dang, where's the shot? Oh wait, Wizard Grandma is Kanika's mom. Okay, sorry. Why did I see an old lady and assume she's someone's grandma? Okay, if you were, say, trying to predict a horrible disaster that might befall our town, where would you start looking? Well, they say history repeats itself, so I'd probably try and figure out what sort of disasters this region typically falls prey to. Something to do with the mines, probably. Should I be worried about something? I don't know yet. I'll be right back. Gonna go nab some more books. Oh, look at Gretchen! Behave while I'm gone, Gretchen. You don't have to worry about her, Stella. You're such a good dog, aren't you, Gretchen? Oh. Here, have a biscuit, old gal. Oh, look at her! This perfect creature! We're just gonna screenshot that. Gretchen inhales the soft biscuit, drool leaking from her toothless mouth as she swallows it whole. Look at how happy she is. Pretty sure Stella's barking up the wrong tree, Oscar. I don't think we have to worry about any horrible calamity befalling the town. But she's right about the weird stuff. There's definitely something unusual going on out in those woods. I don't want to scare the sweet librarian, man! Whatever's out there in the woods has been brutalizing the local wildlife. I don't think it's safe. I'm gonna try calling Rosalina again. His phone case is one of the little book tabs for libraries. That's precious. I'm sure she's fine, really. Rosalina's a smart kid. She knows better than to go around getting into trouble, and we'll make sure to keep our eyes peeled. Thanks, Kanika. And Kayshurrr, if you see a 13-year-old girl with a black braid and glasses, would you let her know her dad is worried about her? Oscar anxiously wanders off, phone in hand. Got him! Just grabbed a whole mess of local history books. Stella sets a massive pile of books on the table and pulls up a chair. Alright. Got our snacks, got our source documents. Let's get this research party started. This is gonna be so much faster with the two of you here to help out. I'll be just doing most of my research online. You never know what kind of weird biases the folks writing these books might have. Whatever you find online might be biased too, you know. Which is why we cross-reference things. Yeah, you're right. It's good to cast a wide net. Guess the books are up to me and Kayshurrr. Also, the little stickers on her laptop. Reading awaits. No, we're not gonna make them do all the work. Let's do this first one. Talk about the coal mines, cause like, obviously that's the center of everything. We even saw the picture in the front of the library. Those dudes were dressed up like miners. Forced into retirement at age 50 due to a war injury from his time in the Indian Wars, exacerbated by his short stint serving as a captain in the Confederacy. Silas Scarlet also lost his eldest two sons to that bloodiest of wars, leaving his third eldest son, Andrew Jackson Scarlet, to take charge of the mine. Under his leadership, the mine prospered, undoubtedly, in part due to the growth of the railroad industry. Managed to evade the coal union for decades, making them one of the most profitable mines in the country. Andrew Scarlet built the surrounding town into what it is today, with expensive stone buildings, a bustling main street, and overseeing it all, the elegant Scarlet estate that was, until 1889, the largest and finest feat of architecture in the region. Culminating in the tragic collapse of 1918, it was found that Charles Shaw, the co-manager of the mine, had loosened security measures to increase production during World War I, resulting in a fatal collapse and the deaths of over 160 men and boys, some as young as 10. The casualties included Andrew Jackson Scarlet's eldest son, Theodore, who had taken over for his aging father during the bustle of the war. His brother, Enoch V. Scarlet, managed to pull the mine from the brink of ruin, thereby saving the town. So this is how your family made its fortune. Silas Scarlet, soldier, woodsman, leader? Silas Everett Scarlet was born to Colonel Everett J. Scarlet in 1818, one of 12 siblings. He grew up in eastern North Carolina during a tumultuous time in the state's history, and not much is known about his life before he joined the army in 1836. He quickly rose through the ranks, in part due to his father's connections, but also due to a particular ruthlessness, for which he received the nickname Bloody Silas Scarlet. The federal government granted the now Captain Silas a tract of bounty land in exchange for his service in the Indian War, and he settled into the hills of North Carolina in 1841. That land would become Scarlet Hollow. But it started as a simple log cabin, built by Silas's own 2 hands, occupied by his family of 10, Silas, his wife Mary Joseph Scarlet, and their 8 children. Logging business brought many workers and fellow landowners to the hills, but it wasn't until Silas discovered rich seams of coal running underneath the entire region that Scarlet Hollow was really put on the map. He saved what he could and bought the surrounding hillside at a great discount, cleverly hiding what he knew about the land's true value. Thus, he had all the resources to found Scarlet Hollow's now famous coal mine. Finished with this one. Oof! A few entries catch your eye. Wampus Cat! Tommy Knockers! Taily Po! I know at least 2 of those. Looks like the Wampus Cat. Often linked to Cherokee legends, some cite the Wampus Cat as originating with the story of a woman who sought vengeance against a monstrous cat demon for driving her husband mad. She hunted it down and, by wearing a bobcat mask, tricked it into using its own vile magic on itself, freeing the people of their region from its evil. Others say the creature comes from the story of a woman who wore the pelt of a wildcat to witness forbidden hunting rites. The hunters of her village gathered to perform the rites, and she watched in secret from underneath the cat's pelt, but was soon discovered. For her indiscretion, she was fused with the pelt and transformed into a creature that was neither human nor cat, forced to wander the wilderness alone, feared by all. Her calls are those of great sadness and serve as a warning to anyone who dares go against tradition. Tommy Knockers originated in Cornish mythology, spreading to the United States when Cornish immigrants began working in Appalachian mines. Their name for the knocking that can be heard from seemingly within the walls before a cave-in. According to some, the knocking serves as a benevolent warning. Others believe that the creatures have stolen hammers to the supports. Creatures take stolen hammers to the supports of mines and collapse them on whoever is unfortunate enough to still be inside. They are traditionally thought to be impish, leprechaun-like beings, but some claim they are the spirits of dead miners, forever cursed to haunt their final resting place. The Taily Po. There was a hunter who lived in a tiny cabin in the middle of the woods, all alone with his hunting dog. One night, after a particularly bad week of hunting, both their stomachs empty, the hunter spied something out of the corner of his eye. Some small creature had gotten into the cabin through the hole, and before he could even figure out what it was, he'd drawn his gun and fired at the thing, his hunger guiding his actions. But it was quick, and ran back through its hidey hole and out of sight, leaving only its long, black tail shot off by the hunter's rifle. "Guess this will have to do," he said to his dog, and threw the tail in a pot to cook a soup. He and his dog ate well that night, the tail filling them both up. The hunter crawled into his bed, satisfied, and his dog curled up at his feet. I have to sneeze. Excuse me. He woke up to the sound of long nails scrabbling across wood. His dog was nowhere in sight, only a rumpled spot on the covers where he'd been. And in the gloom, he saw 2 big yellow eyes staring right at him. "I want my Taily Po," a high, hoarse voice croaked from the darkness. "Go away!" he screamed at the thing. But it stepped closer to him, still shrouded in darkness, the sound of long claws dragging across hardwood accompanying its movements. "I want my Taily Po," creature growled again. "I'll get my dog after you," the hunter squeaked, his voice catching in his throat with fear. But there was no dog to be seen. "I want my Taily Po!" Before the hunter could do so much as scream, the creature leapt from the darkness, long claws stretched out towards the hunter. No one is sure what the creature did to him that night, but the next morning, all that remained of the hunter, his dog, and his cabin was a chimney, standing alone in the woods. We're done here. Close the book and put it back. I think I'm all done. Let's check in. Alright, if we're going with what Kanika's mom told us last night, I think we can rule out any natural disasters as what brought the ditchlings here. But not nuclear incidents. Looks like our state has a history with those. What about y'all? Find anything? Cat! Before you can respond, a handsome black cat leaps onto the table. Stella quickly slams her book shut. Ah, hey Pixel! You might want to close your book. He loves to rip up any paper he can find. Oh, don't worry, little guy. I didn't forget your treats. Pixel immediately goes to town on Stella's treats. Look at that! Sorry if Pixel's bothering y'all. Hopefully he hasn't gobbled up any of our books. Can't stand the thought that people might pay attention to anything that isn't him. I was gonna say, why do you let a paper shredder freely wander a library? Got very loud all of a sudden, game. Have you seen this little guy's face? How can I say no to that? Leave Pixel be. You decide to leave Pixel be. Right? Give Gretchen a treat, please. Oh, it's very good. The cat curls up on the table, fast asleep. Look at the loaf! Alright, I'd better get back to shelving. Let me know if y'all find anything. Any luck with Rosalina? Not yet. I knew a teen would be a handful, but I didn't think it'd happen overnight. Probably head out once you're all done and check in on her usual haunts. Yeah, let's do that. Stella, what was that you were saying about nuclear incidents? You were talking about the Goldsboro thing, right? Yeah. Apparently in the 60s, a B-52 carrying a live warhead broke up mid-air and dropped a couple of bombs. Fascinating bit of history there. First of the two bombs landed upright after its parachute got caught in a tree. Thankfully, it didn't go off. At the time, the government claimed that the bomb was unarmed, but it later came out that the only thing preventing a detonation was a single electrical switch, which failed to trigger on the descent. Jesus. And 60 years later, the second bomb still hasn't been recovered. Right, it's conventional explosive disintegrated in mid-air, but most of the nuclear material was made unrecoverable by flooding. If I remember correctly, they just buried it and sealed it up. That doesn't seem great! Bomb is somewhere else. Why would there be so many digitals here? I don't think disarming nuclear bombs is part of our skill set. Absolutely not. Also, Goldsboro is almost 400 miles from here. I think we're good. I'm just saying, you never know with radiation. We actually know quite a bit. It just melts you. It doesn't make monsters. And a 60-year-old bomb isn't going to explode on its own hundreds of miles away and kill us here. You never know. There could always be a whole underground society of bomb-worshipping mutants just waiting to blow it up. I've missed this. Do you think there's a cult here? Yeah, I mean, let's go through all the Explorer options. We might as well, right? You lean in and quietly whisper to Stella and Kanika. Do you guys think that there's, like, a cult here? Maybe the Ditchlings were actually nudists? Oh no. Maybe the Ditchlings were, like, summoned? As part of a ritual or something like that. I'd assumed the spiral we found some sort of... I'd assumed the spiral we found was some sort of nest made by the Ditchlings, but yeah, maybe we had cause and effect backwards. I'm writing it down. It's much more likely that that thing was a nest than it was some sort of magical ritual site. So about the coal mines here, Kanika visibly shudders. I get cold sweats just thinking about being in a place like that. I feel for the guys who work up there. I could never. Hold on a second. Jody, thank you for the contribution to the cosplay stream. I think we're getting like pretty close to filling that up. Speaking for yourself, I love a good crevasse. what happened after what happened after the mine collapse? The book just kind of glosses over that. There was a union for a little bit, but it didn't last. There's not a whole lot written about the past century here. Yeah, the Scarlet Hollow mine isn't exactly the most ethically run business. No offense or anything. I'm sure Tabby runs the mines better than Charles Shaw did. Still hasn't let the union in, though. There's a reason she and I don't talk. Oof. A union-busting mine collapse from poor working conditions? Colored me shocked. Yeah, it's pretty awful. That's what that sculpture out front is for, commemorating all the men and children who died that day. Every kid in Scarlet Hollow learns about the collapse in 1918. Our teachers love to emphasize how many children they had working down there, probably to try and show us how good we have it or whatever. Low bar, if you ask me. You know, that could be what the ditchlings are warning us about. Another collapse. Writing it down on the list of potential disasters. Yeesh, Stella, that's morbid. And besides, it was all Charles Shaw's fault. The labor market is way more strict now. There's no way you could get away with that kind of safety cutbacks he pulled. Y'all don't actually think the mine is about to collapse, right? No, I don't think so. Phew, had me worried there for a second. Right. Oh, you kids thinking that people couldn't get away with that nowadays. I can name 3 places that I've worked at that have. I hate to give Tabitha any credit, but the mine is safer now than it was back then. Still, what a horrible thought. You never know. You guys really seem to have a bone to pick with Charles Shaw. That's what happens when someone directly causes a monumental disaster, especially in a small town like this. People don't spit when they hear your name. He got run out of town on a rail, you know? Oh, that's what the picture out front is! Okay. And that's not a figure of speech. Back then they actually tied you to a rail and ran you out of town. There's a big mural over it over on the far wall. Why was that so hard to get through? He got off easy, if you ask me. Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with the collapse angle, but the mines seem important. The whole town is built around them. Yeah, that's fair. They're bound to be relevant in some way. Hard to argue against that, but that doesn't really give us much to go on. And just because something seems obvious, it doesn't necessarily mean it's right or relevant. Let's talk about Silas Scarlet. So, Silas Scarlet. What a revisionist biography. Really glosses over all the war crimes to paint a picture of a self-made man. It's a perfect example of why you should use multiple sources for your research instead of trusting the first thing you read on a subject. Yep, dude was a monster. Sorry you're related to him. No. Do you think the ditchlings are here for retribution? That seems tenuous. Assuming Kanika's mom is right, they're here as an omen, not because they're going to do something themselves. And I think we know how I feel on the matter. So, Appalachian folk monsters. Wampus cats kinda sound like they could be mountain lions. Voice like a woman crying out, somewhere between person-sized and cat-sized. Definitely. They are 100% mountain lions. Kanika, you know there are no mountain lions up here. I thought you were supposed to be a skeptic. But the myths are old, right? Mountain lions didn't go extinct in the Appalachians that long ago. Those legends just haven't died off yet. Almost every cryptid can be tracked down to either a hoax or someone getting confused about a perfectly normal animal. Sometimes both. Bigfoot, for instance, started as a prank, then folks saw bears walking around on their hind legs and got freaked out, and now here we are. You'll eat those words when I get the first clear footage of a Bigfoot. If you manage that, I will print out a piece of paper that says Bigfoot isn't real and literally eat it. I promise. I'm holding you to it. Do you think the ditchlings are Tommyknockers? What, with this whole warning thing? Good thought, but Tommyknockers live in mines. That's like their whole thing. I'm gonna write it down though. Tommyknockers are literally just the sounds that happen when a bunch of rocks and wood are about to collapse. Are they? Or are they the sound of mysterious creatures pounding on the rocks and support beams with hammers to cause a collapse? There's simply no way to know. My mom used to tell me that Tailipo story back when I was little. Can't believe I forgot that one. It scared me so bad I didn't eat soup for years. Thought a monster might try and dig it out of my stomach if I did. Emmy, hi. Oh, I'm sorry your internet's being dumb. But I'm glad you're here. Hold on just a second. Yeah, you will. I don't want to say that too much has happened, though, honestly. It's mostly just been information gathering at this point. And then a very quick recap of the previous episode. The previous game that we did. Right, we can all sympathize. We understand this struggle. But we're happy to have you here. It is true. Gresham has made a lot of very good faces. Look at this perfect puppy. Also, new cat. His name is Pixel. I love that one. There's this old chimney in the woods that I used to think was the chimney from Tailipo. The one that was left after the thing did whatever it did. Now, I know that's just because chimneys don't burn down and wooden houses do. That doesn't mean it's not the chimney from Tailipo. Right, watch the VOD for all the good dog faces. And a quick checkup on the possum. On the dresser possum. Yeah, Pixel is a terror in this library. He likes to tear up any paper he can get a hold of. To which it's like, that's the worst cat you can have for a library. But hey, whatever. I think Oscar takes, whatever help he can get. Oh yeah, and we had a very brief coffee date with Avery, and it was perfect. All our friends are here, it's very good. I've camped out there a couple of times and seen some pretty spooky stuff. Yeah, I watched that video. You saw raccoons. You're gonna get rabies one of these days, chasing after wildlife like that. What can I say? I like to live on the edge. Let's move on. Do you think Wayne factors into any of this? I honestly wouldn't be shocked. There's something seriously wrong with him. Like, I can viscerally feel it in my guts. Maybe he's sick. Maybe that has something to do with what you saw in the woods. I don't know. I'd buy it. Oof. I mean, I want to check out... I for sure want to go back into the woods, and I want to check out the mines. And we should probably help trying to find Rosalina. So I guess, what do y'all think? There's an awful lot of mine-related stuff in my notes. Maybe that should be our next stop. We can poke around, find out if anyone's seen anything weird. Just to clarify, you're suggesting we go to question some of the miners, right? We are not poking around unprepared in the actual mines, right? Right? Yeah, totally. 100%. I would never. We don't even have a good reason to go down there. Good. Let's keep it that way. You know how I feel about mines. I promise, Neeks, you're just going to question some of the miners. And if that question gives us a good reason to poke around, say, a cool abandoned coal mine, then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. You can cross that bridge when we come to it. I am not going underground. Just messing with you. We'll stick to the surface. Okay, good. And hopefully we can find out what happened to Wayne while we're at it. Ah, yeah, Tabitha! She's totally going underground. Yeah, I'm concerned for Kanika. Oh, like, I don't want Kanika to get hurt. I don't want any of these people to get hurt. Maybe Tabitha can help us out. No! I don't think she'd be super jazzed to see any of us snooping around the mines. Can't imagine what she'd do if we actually bothered her while she was trying to run the place. She does get a little grumpy when she's at work. She gets grumpier at work. I'm pretty sure snark is that girl's baseline level of existence. Chatting over dinner might be a better way to get to know her. If you're okay eating boxed mac and cheese, we can sneak around the mines, no problem. I'll make sure to keep my eyes peeled for her. She won't even know we were there. Look at us, going out on a caper together. I missed this. I missed it too. I mean, sure, it's not under the best circumstances, but I've been so wrapped up in running the store, I didn't realize how much I missed being able to hang out with you. Though, there is something missing. Reese. I really miss that dude. Can't believe how long it's been since we've seen each other. Have you seen him lately? Nope. I've tried to plan stuff, but he's been too sick. I didn't realize it was getting so bad. That poor guy. You know, we could just pop over and surprise him. He seemed excited to meet Kayshurrr. Maybe we'll finally get him to leave his little cave. Hell yeah, let's do it! Alright, let's roll out! Okay, but can we invite my... can we invite my new best friend Avery as well, please? See ya, Oscar. We'll let you know if we run into Rosalina. Thanks, guys. I'll keep y'all posted. Thanks, bud! Reese's home stands at the edge of the forest wall, an isolated buffer cushioning the rest of the town from an unending wilderness. Look at Gretchen! Look at the potato! Also, Kanika's outfit is perfect. I think the last time we saw her, she was just in her BJs, which, I mean, is fine, but perfect. Reese, it's Stella! I brought some buddies, too! Shh, not so loud. He's still sleeping. Can I help you with something? The woman in the doorway stares directly into your eyes. You can practically feel her simmering irritation washing over you. Hi, Dr. Kelly. We were wondering if it would be okay if Reese could come hang out. Nothing strenuous, we promise. Not gonna wake him up. If he's sleeping, he probably needs it. Whatever you two have planned is probably beyond what he can manage right now anyways. Oh no, poor Reese. It's just been so long since either of us have gotten the chance to hang out with him. I'm sure he and Kayshurrr would get along super well too. I'm gonna lie. We're doing it. Stella's right. We're just going for a light walk, and I've heard such great things about your son. I'm only in town for a few more days, and it'd be a shame if I didn't get the chance to meet him. Katie! Hello, welcome readers! How is everyone doing? How are we all hanging? Welcome, friends. Fantastic. Also, thank you, Travis, for the shout out for Katie. Also, exciting! You were playing The Room. It was a good game. How was it? Did you enjoy it? Hello, Garlips. Welcome, fantastic. Nice to have you here. How is everyone doing? I think some of you know me, but if not, we'll just, hey, thank you for the follow. Let me put that under there. Garlips, thank you for the follow. I super duper appreciate it. Let me turn that on. Never mind. It's a wild game, but it's so much fun. Yeah, it's a good game. But yes, hello, welcome raiders. For those of you who don't know me, I am Kayshurrr. I'm an LGBTQ+ streamer who focuses mostly on horror and mystery games. Today we're playing a game called Scarlet Hollow. It's a visual novel horror game that takes place in the Appalachian mountain range. I think we've been streaming for about an hour and a half now. Heck yeah! This is what we do, horror and mystery. We're currently doing a Bloodborne playthrough. We're working on some Scarlet Hollow, and we're also playing Deathmark. Those are our current series happening right now. I think we're gonna go until until we're finished with this episode. I don't know how long this chapter of the game is, but we managed to get the first chapter done in a single sitting, so here's hoping. But yes, hello, welcome. We're super happy to have you guys here. Yeah, someone's missing, someone's dead. There's lots of animals around that are definitely super sick. I have them on a timer, but in case people need it, we do have content warnings for our current game. So if any of these things are potentially triggering or upsetting to you, it gives you a chance to either give yourself an exit when that content comes up, or you can decide that this game may not be for you. The other one is, if you're interested in checking this game out, there is the Steam link for you, so you can purchase the game for yourself as well. I do highly recommend, especially with like some of these like multi-choice games, highly recommend people pick it up and play it themselves. This one in particular, super fantastic, lovely, wonderful game. But Katie and all of the people who have come with you for the raid, I realize you guys have probably been streaming for a little while. So if you do need to get up, take care of yourselves post-stream, I totally understand that. We will be here for a while playing this, so if you need to get up, stretch your legs, get something to drink, get something to eat, go for it, take care of yourselves. We'll be here when you get back, if you decide to join us. So yeah, that's our whole spiel. Again, thank you, Katie, for the raid. I super duper appreciate it. Let's see. Oh, hydrate reminder from Emmy and a stretch. Thank you. Hydrate. Get a stretch in here as well. Oh yeah. Thank you for those. Oh yeah, for anybody who has channel points or is getting channel points, we do have a community challenge going on right now for a cosplay stream. If we reach the 100K, which I think we're almost at 75,000 points, wowee! But if we reach the there we go, we're at 75 points. We're 75% of the way there. Thank you, Travis, for the contribution. But yeah, basically, as soon as we reach that goal, I will do a stream in a cosplay. Garlips, thank you for the contribution. Love the fact that you're already here for this. It's perfect and lovely. But yeah, we've got that running and going. I'm trying to think of what else there is that I need to say, and I think that's everything. So let's get back to it. To lying to this woman that we've never met to get her sick son to come join us on a probably extremely vigorous walk. It's fine. It's fine. Stella's right. We're just gonna go for a light walk, and I've heard such great things about your son. I'm only in town for a few more days, and it'd be a shame if I didn't get the chance to meet him. Dr. Kelly looks you up and down and sighs. Alright, you win. He's usually feeling his best around mid-afternoon. Why don't you come over tomorrow? We can have some supper and y'all can hang out for a bit. I don't promise that he'll be perky, but I'm sure it will brighten his spirits to see you two again. I'm sure he'll be happy to meet you too, Kayshurrr. That would be great. I can bring a side dish. Maybe deviled eggs? Does he still like those? No, eggs are a little too much for him. They don't settle well. You can leave the cooking to me. I know what he can handle. Okay, I'll bring soda then. That's not... Okay, yes, fine. You can bring soda. Nothing with caffeine. Ginger ale, preferably. Oh, and leave the dog at home. No! Gretchen has to stay with us. She might cheer him up, you know? They have those therapy dogs in a hospital. No dogs. Thanks so much, Dr. Kelly. We'll stop bothering you now. See you later. That mom seems lame. 100%. I got this bad feeling that Reese isn't actually as sick as she claims he is. And that makes me extremely uncomfortable and weary of her. And assumably, Reese is about as old as we are, and we're obviously all out of high school. I want to say we're like mid-20s probably. So, hey. Right, dogs are so good, especially this dog. Look at this potato. Munchausen? Possibly. I mean, that would be... Yeah, I just immediately get worried when someone's that extremely overbearing about anyone. I don't know. Then the flip side is being like, well, I hope he's actually sick so that it's called for. Wait, no, if it's happening to someone else, it's Munchausen by proxy. Is it? Okay. Yeah, I don't know. One of those. It's just, but yeah, just definitely concerned. Dr. Kelly nods in acknowledgement and quickly shuts the door. The sound of several locks clicking into place can be heard from within. Yeah, we all understood what we were trying to say. God, that woman makes me so nervous. You know what that is for a rap battle? Is this where you've gained all of your knowledge, Fruity? Also, yeah, the fact that, like, these two are just, like, super uncomfortable with her adds to my discomfort, because it's, like... I remember she used to be so nice and carefree when we were kids. She always had the best stickers when we had to get our shots. Maybe she's just stressed about Reese. Or maybe she's just nice to kids. Either way, I guess it's just the three of us. You gonna drive? Yeah, sorry. I don't like the thought of going up there without the van. Cool, I'll take my shortcut then. It shouldn't take long for me to get there. You're welcome to tag along, Kayshurrr. Don't worry, I won't get offended if you'd rather ride with Kanika. I'm sure you're probably sick of the woods. Either way works for me. Oh, don't... Munchausen by proxy, he ain't as sick as he thinks he... There you go. I'll let you guys decide who we want to hang out with. Do we want to go walk with Stella, or do we want to ride with Kanika? While y'all are choosing, I will explore, since this will not determine anything. Why not just drive up with Kanika? Aren't the mines a bit of a ways off? Don't worry about it, Kayshurrr. There's a lot of junk in the back of my van. It's got a little tight with more than, or it'll get a little tight with more than 2 people. Dog lady or no dog lady? Okay, but to be fair, Kanika is perfect. I do love Kanika. But I also love Stella and Gretchen. She's one step off perfect. See, that's kind of like, I want to get to know Kanika more, but I also want the possibility of us running into a cryptid. So this looks fairly split. So let me set up a poll right quick. Yeah, we'll just run that for 1 minute. Kanika might run over a cryptid. Ditchlings got run over by Kanika. Perfect. Right, I do love both of them. As much as I love all the animals in this game, I do love these characters, and I want to get to know all of them. Alright. I was gonna say, it's all Stella and Gretchen at this point, but one person said Kanika. 2 people have said Kanika. I swear to God, if this is a tie, we're gonna have a problem. Oh my goodness. It is close. Why are we splitting the party? My assumption, given the dialogue that we just encountered, is that Stella doesn't like being in cars. There's probably something that has to do with cars that makes her extremely uncomfortable, and so she would rather walk. Alright, looks like Stella and Gretchen have won out. Kanika, I love you! Actually, I forget that I can save. I'm doing that thing again, where I forget that I can save. So we'll go walk with Stella. I'll walk with Stella. We'll meet you there. Plus, it's probably for the best, because, like, I don't want to leave Stella alone in the woods. Oh, we split the party cover work. We gotta get you in a D&D group, Fruity. Because that's my job. My job is to encourage everyone to split the party. The woods are calm and serene compared to last night, though you can't help but get the feeling that danger lurks just beyond the trees. It's the best idea. I don't know what you're talking about. Hey, thanks for coming along with us. With Gretchen and me, I mean. I hope I haven't seemed too cold about everything that happened last night. The truth is that I'm barely keeping myself together. I just don't know how to let it out. This is true, you can faceplant. Duke died out there last night, and I can't stop thinking that it might have been my fault. Stella? If it was anyone's fault, it was mine! If only I died for that flashlight. If only I didn't drag you along into the woods. Stella pauses, searching for what to say. Look at Gretchen! It's like there's this guilt boiling under my skin, but the only way I can process what happened is by turning off the part of me that feels things. When I'm around other people, it's like I think of Duke dying as just a thing that happened. Like it's just part of another video. Because if I actually admit to other people that I feel something, then I'd have to admit to myself that what happened is my fault. Just do what I do and lie through your teeth. Just lie to everyone about it. It'll be fine. Nothing terrible will ever happen. Oof. Of course it's not your fault. Option 2? I don't know how to break this to you, but if you didn't hesitate last night, we all might have gotten out of there alive. You know, Stella, you know that guilt you're feeling? Fucking feel it. No. No. Bad option. Of all of them, this is probably the best. I mean, I like the whole, like, of course it's not your fault, but it's like, that's not gonna change anything, so... Don't accidentally click anything! We'll try not to. Yeah, we'll do this. What happened happened, and we can question our decisions and blame ourselves for what happened until the cows come home. Or we can move forward. Together. Thanks, Kayshurrr. You're right. I should be better at taking my own advice. Glad we could talk about this, though. Can't imagine what it'd be like to go through something like that, or something like last night alone. Genuinely scared me. Conversation comes to a dramatic halt, with you, Stella, and Gretchen all whirling around to face the source of the sound. Oh no, Gretchen, get away from there, please! Oh, calm down, girl. It's just a bird. Same probably goes for the two of us. I guess we're all a little on edge. Let's hurry to the mine. It shouldn't be much further. I don't like this hole! There's our girl! Kanika casually leans against her van as you and Stella emerge from the woods. Hey! Y'all have a good walk? Yeah, it was great. I mean, not that you were missing out on anything. You didn't run into any of those creatures, did you? Nope. So look at this dog! absolute goober. That makes sense. They're probably nocturnal. I don't know if I should feel relieved or disappointed. Also, Arcade! Thank you for the contribution to the cosplay stream. I appreciate it. But we're all here. What's the plan? I guess we just go talk to people. Guess so. I should probably be on lookout duty. I'm a bit of a persona non grata in the mines. Tabitha? Yeah, I might have tried sneaking in to talk to her a time or two too many. And Gretchen makes it extra hard to be sneaky. We're probably less likely to get caught if only one of us is snooping around down there. I call dibs! I love to do a good sneak. Let the dog do the sneaking? Yes! The pug with the respiratory issues will do the sneaking. Just... just constantly. No one will hear her coming. No one! Gretchen would be the worst sneaky dog. Still love her, though. You're gonna do great. So, the plan. You know those cheesy old rom-coms where somebody wears an earpiece on their first date? Whoa, do you have some kind of surveillance set up in the back of your van that I didn't know about? What? No. I have a pair of earbuds with a really good mic. We can just do a group call. You will hear her heavy breathing and think she is a monster. You know what? Fair point. Beautiful. Gretchen's eyes are large enough to see. This fucking dog! Gretchen is the main character of this game. You cannot convince me otherwise. She is an asset. She's got dark vision. I love this dog. Also, why? Wait. Why does Kanika have nails only on one hand? We seen that? Also, hi, Thunder. Yeah, we can do a group call. Kanika hands you a pair of earbuds. We can feed you questions if you get stuck, and Stella can give you a heads up if she's headed your way. Dang, I've missed doing this sort of thing with you. You're so thorough. Ah, thanks. I miss this too. I guess we should part ways and start the call, yeah? Look at this dog! This is the asset. Stella and Kanika break off, leaving you alone at the entrance to the mines. Your phone buzzes. Hey! Can you hear us? Try saying something. I don't even need to read the other ones. Something. Okay, but 20 feet into a mine, you lose all cell service. Just won't go that deep then. Stella and Kanika chuckle on the other end of the line. Alright, cool. Nothing to do now but enter the worksite. Enter. Pass through the unlocked fence and enter the property of the Scarlet Hollow Mine. Oh no. Pass through the unlocked fence and enter the property of the Scarlet Hollow Mine. I'm in. Alright, Morpheus, good to know. Go straight to the main office to find your cousin. So, Tabitha. No, we'll approach the nearest group of miners. Oh, this man's so grumpy! She's so confused. You approach the nearest group of miners. A blonde woman, a broad-shouldered man, and a long-haired older man. The uniforms identify them as Harrison, Davis, and Zax. Got a reason to be bothering us? Hey, I'm Tabitha's cousin! Hey there, I'm Tabitha's cousin. Miners straighten up, suddenly very serious. Sorry, I didn't know. I thought you were maybe one of them environmentalists, or... Yeah, sorry for any trouble. How can we help you? First off, y'all can chill out. Just because I'm Tabitha's cousin doesn't mean I'm a snitch. Yeah, alright. You seen anything weird lately? Miners look you up and down. Weird how? Annie, hello, welcome! Weird noises coming from the woods. Any knocking in the mines? People getting sick? Weird animal sightings. Nope. You've been talking to that townie? The one the boss gave a lifetime ban to? Wait, are they talking about me? Yeah, she's like a Bigfoot YouTuber or something. Her videos are actually pretty good. Yep, that's me alright. And aw, that's so sweet. Go back to your shady dealings, miners. I'm 100% not a cop. I would have to tell you if I was a cop. That's not Stella. Stella's not that lame. But you know, now that I think about it, it's pretty weird. I haven't been seeing many animals at all lately. Used to be I'd see all sorts of critters. Now it's mostly birds. This is your first year up here, ain't it? Just not used to the seasons changing. All the animals are hibernating, that's all. I don't know, she's got a point. I've been up here 5 years now, and it's never been like this before. Maybe it's that global warming thing. I think you're calling it climate change now. Have you heard any weird noises coming from the woods? Not a peep. We're underground most of the day, though. You know, I heard something unusual the other night. Thought it might have been an owl or something, but it didn't sound right. It was an owl. You're just not used to the local wildlife yet. Zax, you're... Okay, bud. Have you heard any knocking in the mines? Can't barely hear nothing when the machines are going down there. He's right, it's loud as shit. It does sound like knocking, though, the way the machine pounds through the rock. Not sure if that's what you're thinking. Not asking about Tommy knockers, are you? Tommy what nows? Tommy knockers. They're like an old Welsh myth? Little guys that live in mines and knock on the walls before they collapse? Nothing like that around here. People getting sick? Like, more than usual? Nope, nothing like that. Feel fit as an ox. We have good working conditions in the mine, and health is wholly looked after. Right, got a couple of other questions. Ask them about Wayne. Okay, Kanika. Strong like ox strong. That's how we're gonna shorthand the strong like ox now. It's just ox strong. Perfect. Do you know anything about a guy named Wayne? Yeah, we knew him. He was such a cut-up. Miss that dude. He accosted me last night. Oh, wait, what? No way. Isn't that the guy y'all said was, well, I guess he's still around. But accosting people at night? That doesn't sound like him at all. What do you think happened to him? What do you think you are? Some sort of cop? No. Just tell me what happened. Fuck off! Hey, Zax, come on, man. No, I've been here decades longer than you, and I know bait when I see it. Let's get out of here. We're just about to start anyways. Sorry. Well, now everyone's gonna think I'm a cop. Miners pack up their things and leave. Maybe it was just me, but they seem to think Wayne was dead, right? It wasn't just you. Don't worry about the miners storming off like that. That's some pretty good info. Approach the other group of miners. Head over to the next group of miners. Before you can reach the miners, you're struck by an intense feeling. You recognize the hollow terror is the same thing you felt last night when you set eyes on that awful man in the miner's jacket. You shouldn't be up here. It's dangerous. Ghost! What are you? Flesh and blood, much like yourself. You don't have to be afraid of me. Stay home. Wait for the week to end. Don't keep putting yourself in the path of danger. This is all I ask. Are you the Mothman? 100% not a zombie. Seriously though, is he the Mothman? Before you can say another word, the figure is gone. Hey, Kayshurrr, are you still there? We've just been getting static from you. Oof. We got the jump on me. Well, I thought I saw you talking to someone down there. Are you okay? Whatever he is, I don't think he's human. Oh, that was a Bigfoot? I mean, his boots were pretty sizable. I hate to say it, but between the way those miners talked about him and how the call went to static, what if he's a ghost? Like, actually a ghost. I mean, I'd let Mothman take me away. You hate to say it, Stella, I don't think anything would make you happier than Wayne being a ghost. Also, ghosts aren't real. You know, just because I want ghosts to be real doesn't mean I want this ghost harassing Kayshurrr. Thanks. Here, we'll explore. He told me to stay at the estate for the rest of the week. That I'd be safe there. Why would he tell me that? What the hell is that supposed to mean? He must have been threatening you, right? The plot thickens. Here. Wayne trying to make me leave just means that we're on the right track. I'm not about to back down. No, I mean, as much as I don't trust him, I do actually trust him. Like, he makes me uncomfortable, and, like, the obvious option is to not trust him because, spooky man telling us things. But it's like, I mean, now that I have this, like, this thought that he's the Mothman planted in my head, it's like, maybe I should listen to him. Oh. Wow, so brave. Heck yeah, Kayshurrr, we've got your back. Approach another group of miners. Hey there, can we help you with something? Start with that. Have you fellas seen anything out of the ordinary lately? Like what? Have you seen any weird animals? Don't tend to go on many hikes. Not exactly the nature scene type. After a full day of work, all I see is my bed. Maybe a few beers in between. Any odd noises in the woods? Heard something a few nights ago. Like, nothing I've ever heard. Some unearthly beast. I'm telling you, Isaacs, you need to take a sick day. You need rest, man. I've already taken a sick day this year. Can't afford to take any more if I want to have Christmas off. You've taken a single sick day. And you can't... I gotta go yell at my cousin. Tabitha, that's what I'm saying, Kanika. Owls fly, therefore are unearthly. Yeah, that tracks. Can't be that bad there, right? Have people been getting sick? You a health inspector or something? Boss looks out for our health. Does she know? Have you heard any knocking in the mines? Knocking? Not that I've heard. Can't hear shit down there with the machines and men working. My dad used to work these mines before they brought in the continuous miner. Big machine, that is. He told me stories about something that sounded like someone was pounding on the walls. No offense, Isaacs, but your daddy had a few screws loose. Rodriguez! He was a fine man. It's all on that front, thanks. Anything else? Oof, I want to ask both of these, but I'm like scared that they're gonna shut the conversation down again. Do any of you know a man named Wayne? Wayne? Do you mean Sam Wayne? What are you asking about him for? Wait, have you seen him? No. Damn, I thought... He's dead, Isaacs. Get over it. No, come on, man. There's no way. How could he just die? Oh, no. Why don't you ask his girlfriend? Yikes. Do you think? No. No way. Just saying. He wasn't exactly the first fella to fall for her. Her charms? Lots of heartbreak in that woman's history. Lots of jilted ex-lovers, if you catch my drift. Dang, who are they talking about? I told him not to get involved with her. I told him. What do you guys think of Tabitha? Now, why would you go and ask a question like that? Are you trying to insinuate something? Horrible woman. Now, fellas, let's not get go besmirching the fine, gentle lady. Smith is right. She's got a lot to answer for. Alright, fellas. I think we better cool it and get back to work before any of us say something we regret. Probably right. Should we check in? Just as a heads up, the only group I still see out there is pretty close to the main office. It might still be worth talking to them, but I don't know if I can give you all that much of a heads up if Tabitha comes out. I want to try and talk to one last group of miners. Brave. Good luck. Well, I want to talk to Tabitha as well. So, like, if she comes out, I can just be like, yo. Going around asking questions, huh? You don't look like you're from the inspector's office. What can you tell me about Sam Wayne? Oh shit, they know, right? Word gets around fast at these mines. Got himself into trouble, didn't he? I did get an achievement for being nosy. Got the Nosy Nancy achievement. That's me. Why, you seen him around? What's that young buck up to? He's doing a slasher movie, but in real life. He's been following me. I think he might have been murdered. I've heard some from some of the other folks in camp that he had a nasty spat with an ex and disappeared not long after. You mean the boss? As far as I know, that never ended. Oh shit! Wayne and Tabitha were a thing? Stella audibly gasps. Same! Yeah, I figured he'd just run off to live in that big mansion with his Belle. The thought of a strapping young man like him with that sour-faced broad always left such a bad taste in my mouth. Right? Oof! Yes? I don't think anyone knows whether it's a past or present thing. Oh my god, gross! As if you wouldn't fall on your knees if a woman of means showed the slight bit of interest in you, or any woman at all. Fair enough. But I suppose this begs the question, did she run him off, or did some jealous son of a bitch oust him? Oh, I guess it could have been Pearl Ann, which is Tabitha's mother, our aunt. It's gotta be Tabitha well, no, not necessarily. Hold on, let me think for a second. They might still be referring to Pearl Ann as the boss because, like, she just recently died, didn't she? I mean, I guess I'll clear it up if we ask, so... Wait, are you talking about Tabitha? Yup, okay. Alright. Dang, I figured that's what they were talking about, or that's what they were getting at, but it's weird to hear it out loud. You good, Stella? Yeah, I just had no idea. Oof! Have you noticed anything strange here lately? All kinds of weird stuff happens in these hills. Sort of weird do you mean? Any weird animal sightings? Saw a raccoon with a big old tumor last week. Spooked me something awful. It's nature for you. Not always pretty. Leave this place, it's not safe. Um, I don't want to freak him out. We'll just leave it at that. Any noises from the woods? All the time. Howling, screaming, all sorts of fiendish caterwauling. Probably just screech owls and bobcats, you old coot. Might be, might not be. But I heard something the other night that sent the fear of God shivering down my spine, I tell you. Just leave it at that. Have you heard any knocking in the mines? You asking us if we've heard the Tommy knockers? Of course we have. We're old timers. All us who was here before the machine got brought in know the Tommy knockers. One nuisance. Always stealing my hammers. It's true. Had a pickaxe stolen too. And when you heard knocking coming from one of the old tunnels, it was enough to make a man pray. It's like I figured out what to do for my next video. Better not be thinking of going into those old mine shafts alone. I could always use a partner in crime. I'm going to wind up going down there with you, aren't I? Don't do it. People getting sick? I mean, some of the older miners, sure, but I wouldn't call that unusual. Alright, that's all on that front. So, what do you think of Tabitha? The two men uncomfortably shift for a moment. Uncomfortably shift for a moment? Not the kindliest woman I've ever met. She runs the place alright. Tell it to all the boys she's been laying off lately. Keep going around saying that and see how long till you're one of them boys. All I have to say is, a mine that's doing well doesn't go around laying off its workers for no reason. Not sure any of us are gonna have jobs in a few years. Take your damn fool. You're gonna be next if you keep up that kind of talk. Kayshurrr, I think we've got a problem. Tabitha's found me, hasn't she? Yeah, she fucking has. What the hell are you doing here? Ah, crap. Good luck. Sorry, Kayshurrr. And that's our cue. Pardon us. You shouldn't be here. This place is dangerous. Why can't you just stay in the estate and stop sticking your nose where it doesn't belong? And what is that ridiculous thing doing in your ears? Are you trying to record my employees? Are you trying to record me? Tabitha snatches the earbuds out of your ears and throws them to the ground. Typical phone-addicted city dweller. Ugh. And I have a meeting in 5 minutes. Can't even drive you back. Okay, look, I don't want you wandering anywhere else. Just stay here for an hour. I can take you back to the estate as soon as my meeting wraps up. Can you please do that for me? Oh, there's so many options. Oh, God. Okay. I don't remember if we ever talked to her about Wayne. Just wanted to spend time with my favorite cousin. Oof. No, let's go straight to the point. You were dating Sam Wayne. What happened to him? Excuse me? I'm not dating anybody. I don't even know a Sam Wayne. Whoever's been telling you this is clearly trying to spread rumors to hurt my character. Who said that? I want names. Oh, I guess she said... Tabitha, he's been following me. Why? How should I know? I don't know what these people told you, but I'm sure it's all bullshit. I don't involve myself with their lives. I think a bunch of miners on break are just going to be honest with a random stranger that wanders into their camp? More naive than I thought. I need to get to my meeting. Just stay here until I come get you, and do not move a muscle. Oh, and if you don't want to be followed by some weirdo, just stay home. Except he was watching my window from home, Tabitha! Tabitha rushes off to her meeting. You stoop to the ground and pick up Kanika's earbuds. To a random stranger. There's been a couple of errors. But that's okay. I'll let it slide. Sorry I wasn't able to give you a better warning. You good? Just meet at the van. Who's this? Oh, it's Rosalina! You're interrupted by a sudden movement out of the corner of your eyes. A girl carrying a bundle of snacks pops through a hole in the fence and disappears over the crest of a hill. Hey, I think I just saw Rosalina. Wait, really? What is she doing here? Clearly, she's doing a delinquency. Right? I want those snacks. I mean, yeah, but what kind of delinquency? A juvenile delinquents! Only one way to find out. Let's go after her. No! My child! Oh no! Y'all see that ditchling? Y'all see that ditchling up in the corner? I see that ditchling up in the corner. Well, fuck. Alright, hold on. We're gonna pause. Is break time. I gotta take a break. Right? Gremlin confirmed. Oh no. Gremlin confirmed. So yeah, break time. We'll be back in just a couple of seconds. Get up, stretch, grab things that you need. And then we'll see what terrible thing is gonna happen to us now because a ditchling showed up. And we're gonna go into this cave and oh my god, I'm gonna get this child murdered. It's gonna be great. Alright. Alright. Are we all ready? Gonna do this? Gonna deal with all the terrible? All the awful? Make it happen? Thank you. Thanks. Thanks. We're back. We're here. It's gonna do the thing. It's gonna be awful. It's gonna be bad. Whole thing's just gonna be bad, you know? Alright. You rush over the hill and get your bearings. The sounds of active mining fading into the distance. Rosalina is nowhere to be found, but dusty footprints point toward a nearby mine. Something about the mine feels wrong, as though a cold anger lies burning inside, sucking the life from the surrounding hills. She didn't. Guess the old Maxwell place doesn't cut it as a secret hangout spot these days. But the Shaw mine? That place was shut down like 100 years ago. After a collapse that killed over 100 people. And here I thought Stella was going to be the one to drag me to an abandoned coal mine. Hold on, I have to sneeze again. Excuse me. My other fear is that Kanika's gonna get dead. And I'm not happy with that. Let's go mystical. Hey, remember all those bad feelings I got last night? This place feels straight up cursed. Thanks, Emmy. I mean, like Kanika said, a lot of people died down there. There's a lot of spooky history to this place. For all we know, maybe all that death left some kind of mark down there. It's too dusty. My allergies have been off the charts, like, today. I'm so stuffy, and it's so miserable. And no amount of medicine is touching it, so it's just... Y'all get to deal with me being stuffy and more sniffly than normal. And sneezy, apparently. We're gonna go down there. As much as we hate it, we're gonna go down there. Okay, just because a bunch of people died in there, it doesn't mean it's cursed. Come on, I'm not about to let Rosalina get hurt in there. There's no corn mold in the mine hole. It'll be good for us. At that point, alright, if it's good for us, let's just do a line of, like, mine dust, you know? Even if it means I have to go underground. Whoa, you sure, Neeks? Kayshurrr and I can handle this on our own. Yeah, I'm sure. As much as I hate confined spaces, I hate the thought of other people getting trapped down there even more. Kanika, no! Gretchen looked so concerned! Stella and Kanika disappear into the mines. Before you follow, you briefly wonder if you should let Tabitha know about this. Gonna save. I'm gonna call her. Pull out your phone and dial your cousin. What is it? You know I'm in a meeting. A kid just snuck into the Shaw mine. I figured you should know. What? Are you serious? Why do things keep happening to me? Oh, whatever. I'll head over there as soon as I can. Just stay where you are and wait for me, alright? God, I don't even know why I'm trying to reason with you. It's not like you'll listen. I called you as a courtesy, but I'm not gonna wait around for you. I swear to God. I'm sorry, but my mind's made up. Hang up the call. I called at least this time to let you know what was happening. You got all mad at me that I didn't text you last night to let you know what was happening. Tabitha's never gonna be happy with me. I would love for Tabitha to like me, but you know what? I gotta go make sure my friends don't die. I'm gonna follow Kanika and Stella into the mine. Take a deep breath and follow your new friends into the mine. What did I just say? The inside of the mine is warmer than you'd expect. Blah, blah, blah. Tabitha is a big dogless grump. She does have frou-frou, but, like, maybe she either needs more cats or she needs to get a dog. Or both. The inside of the mine is warmer than you'd expected. The air thick and wet. The ceiling hangs much lower than you are tall, forcing you and your companions to hunch over, your legs bent in a painful squat as you begin to navigate its maze of corridors. I am gonna call it right now and say that Rosalina is in here not as a hangout spot, but because she's got some person or creature or something that she's feeding, and that's why she's brought snacks. Hey, you made it. Told you she would. They don't need to know that I called her. I was checking behind us to make sure the coast was clear. Smart. Can't imagine what would happen if your cousin caught us down here. If we didn't see Rosalina disappear into this hellhole, you wouldn't catch me dead in a place like this. Though maybe I shouldn't speak too soon. They might catch all of us dead in here. Don't worry, y'all. This place hasn't had a major collapse in over 100 years. We'll be fine. Lightning never strikes twice, right? Well, what matters is that the gang's all here. We'll find Rosalina in no time. We better not be fucking splitting the party. I mean, obviously we couldn't at that point. But, the deeper you progress into the mine, the heavier the air becomes. Coal dust hangs in thick clouds around you, even though this place was abandoned over a century ago, right? It's fine! Everything is fine! Jesus, it's cramped down here. Does anyone else's chest feel tight? Yeah, abandoned mines are way more claustrophobic than people expect them to be, and this one's real bad. You know, because of the child miners? Or should I say, the minor miners? Kanika visibly shudders. It's not at the fact that she's afraid of the tight spaces, it's just at how bad that joke was. Also, look at how concerned Gretchen is! Okay, I'm not superstitious, but if there's one way to make sure you get haunted, it's cracking jokes about dead child laborers while walking on their graves. It is a good joke, though. What can I say? I do my best to tempt the spirits wherever I go. I actually snuck down here a few times to try and get some good footage. Part of my ghost hunting phase. Jesus, Stella, the things you do for your viewers. Did you find anything? I wish. If any place in Scarlet Hollow was actually haunted, it'd be this mine. Hands down. But all I got was dust in my lungs and a couple of false alarms. We're going down, Emmy! We're yelling timber! I don't remember the rest of the song. That's all I know. Stella pauses as sound rushes overhead. Oh my god, what was that? The mine's going to collapse and we're all gonna die here, aren't we? Stella sighs longingly. That's just how wind sounds down here. You sound so disappointed. It just brings back memories of my last foray into these depths. Every time I thought I had finally found a spooky ghost, there wound up being a very unghostly explanation. Like local wildlife, for instance. Like bats! Stella turns her flashlight up towards an alcove ahead. Those guys got me real good last time I was here alone. Oh my god, there are bats down here? I'm gonna get rabies, aren't I? I'm gonna get rabies and die in a mine collapse. You holding up okay, Neeks? Yeah, sorry, I'm just a little on edge. Kanika stopped mid-sentence by a thunderous knock echoing from deeper in the mine. Okay, what was that? That was... I have no idea what that was. Did that sound like knocking to you guys? No, it sounded like something like... Kanika did just get probably the winded. Yep. It's probably just the wind. Don't worry. I'm just gonna make everything weird for everyone. Oh, Kanika! Look at her face. That was a warning. We'd best move swiftly before we anger the spirits at this place. Whoa, you don't think it's Tommyknockers, do you? Okay, no. Tommyknockers are not real. They're not allowed to be real. Are you trying to give me a panic attack? I'd love to spend some extra time poking around down here. Maybe it's got something to do with the mystery. The three of you are interrupted by a second, much less distant sound of a can being popped open. Okay, now that wasn't Tommyknockers. Came from this way. Follow me! You and Kanika follow Stella further into the mine. Oh, it is just a cool kid hangout. This kid with this Bugs Bunny getting stoned. Fucking teens, am I right? You breathe a sigh of relief as the tight passageways give way to a small cavern. A group of teens turns and stares at you with annoyance. I've just ratted out all of these kids! I am a narc! What the hell are you all doing in here? What the hell are you doing in here? You creeps? Are you stalking us? Yeah, creeps. I just said that, Alexis. If I wanted an echo, I'd yell into the Grand Canyon. I am not a cop. Do I look like a cop? I am the sorriest cop. If we've learned anything, it's that I am always the sorriest cop. If I wanted an echo, I'd yell into the Grand Canyon. What are you, 5? Oof. Your dad's looking for you, Rosalina. And who the hell are you exactly? I'm the adult about to kick your dumb teen ass. Fucking watch me, kid. That's Kayshurrr, Tabby's cousin. Can't believe your dad sent people to follow you, Rosalina. That's messed up. I think that qualifies as harassment. You're right, Becca. It is messed up. I don't need him telling me where I can be. He's your fucking dad. Could at least check in so he knows you're not dead. He loves you and worries about you. He's really not asking for much. Don't you kids have school tomorrow anyways? I was gonna say, like, I mean, I get rebelling against, like, some weird fucking helicopter parents, but from what we saw of Oscar earlier, he was really just kind of like, haven't seen my kid in a while, hope she's okay. If y'all see her, let her know I'm worried. Fucking teens, am I right? It's fall break, and we're not kids. Oh my god. Yeah, we're teens. Well, you still look like a bunch of kids to me. Did you guys seriously sneak into an abandoned coal mine to drink canned margaritas? Ugh, we're barely drinking. It's not a big deal. Rosalina, you're 13, and I know the rest of you aren't much older. Whoa, y'all are way rowdier than I ever was at your age. How did you even get a hold of that much booze? Fucking Miles. Of course it was. The teens avoid eye contact. Miles tries to melt into the cavern wall. Oh no, I know this isn't you, Miles. It had better not be. Yeah, whatever, it's me. What are you even doing here? Becca's right. Sounds to me like you're stalking and harassing and all that. You're supposed to be minding the store. It's not like anyone even comes in on Tuesdays. My mom's there, so it's fine. Eyes dart uncomfortably around the cavern as Kanika tears into her brother. It's not fine! It's extremely not fine! It is, in fact, incredibly irresponsible! Why do I always have to be the responsible one? Do you know what I would give to be as carefree as you? I left school so you would have a chance to live your life, and this is what you're doing with it? What would Dad think if he could see this? Stealing booze from the family store to dick around in an abandoned mine? Dad's dead, Kanika. But if he were here, he'd be disappointed you wound up being such a bossy jerk. Nothing ever happens in this town. Who cares if we're having canned margaritas somewhere nobody's supposed to bother us? Oof. If this is what you do for fun around here, maybe the ditchlings were inevitable. Oof! That dig! Oof! Both of y'all should cool it. There's no reason we can't all safely chill here together. Pass me one of those canned margaritas. Hell yeah, right on. Tina and the Beanie passes you a canned margarita, and then I yeet it back at his fucking skull. You know, it's not actually even that dangerous down here. My dad is a foreman at the continuous mining facility, and he says they only abandoned this mine because there wasn't enough coal left. So it's actually really safe, and we can hang out here whenever we want. I thought your dad was a charge hand. No, Alexis. He got promoted last month. Oh, Tabitha, no! I've made a terrible mistake. Correction. Your father was a foreman at the continuous mining facility. We'll see if he even has a job tomorrow morning. What? Oh, shit. Oh, hey, Tabby. Kanika sighs. It's probably for the best that she's here. Do none of you understand what a boarded up mine entrance is supposed to mean? It means it's closed, condemned, not fit for human use. Oh, come on, this place is way sturdy. Check it out, don't fucking touch it! Teen with the beating jumps up and slaps a strut on the ceiling. Oh, was that the knocking we were hearing earlier? My god, Zane, cut it out, you're embarrassing us. Sorry for Zane's behavior. I don't think he realizes how extremely 8th grade it is to jump up and hit things. No offense, Rosalina. None taken. The other 8th graders are totally immature. Not like you, Rosalina. You're chill. And smart, too. Enough! The damage is already done. Now leave. I'm tired of people in this town dragging my cousin headlong into danger. Can't believe I actually agree with Tabitha about anything, but this is the worst place I've ever been in my entire life, and I would like to see the sun again before I die. Oh, come on, you guys. Maybe it's not a big deal. We used to do dangerous stuff all the time, and I still do dangerous stuff now. I mean, I don't like this particular situation with that whole ditchling thing, but outside of that, who are we to tell them where they can hang out? I don't know who you are in this situation, Stella, but I own this mine. It is entirely within my rights to tell them to leave, much like it is entirely within my rights to tell you to leave. Was your lifetime ban from my minds not clear enough? Was your lifetime ban from my minds not a clear enough message for you? Hell yeah, Tabitha, tear that sad 20-something to shreds. I'm going to punch this girl in the mouth. Hey, I'm defending you, and I'm not sad. Where'd you get that idea? Running a clickbaity YouTube channel where you run around in the woods chasing nothing is extremely sad. So she's sad. So what? Give it a few years and you'll be sad too. Passage of time is inescapable. Tabitha. Look, we just wanted to give Rosalina a good time. Her home life sucks right now. Yeah, tell them about where you have to sleep, Rosalina. We've been living in the library for the past couple of weeks. Dad says we can't stay at our house. Got a hot plate and a couple of cots in one of the back rooms. It's actually a pretty sick setup. No, it isn't, Zane. Rosalina deserves better. You care about your home life. If you're going to do your underage drinking, go do it in the woods. Just get off my property. Tabitha. Look, Rosalina, I'm sure Oscar has a good reason for all that. He's a good guy and he cares about you. He thinks our house is haunted. Oh. Wait, what? And I should care because that's such a bullshit excuse. I bet he couldn't afford it anymore and is lying to you to save face. What a coward. Becca, I don't think you can, like, say that about other people's families. Isn't that, like, bullying or something? Shut up, Zane. Back up. He says it's haunted? I can't believe he didn't mention it to me. I could investigate. There's no ghost, Stella. It would be cool if there was, but Becca's right. I just wish he could be honest with me and tell me what's really going on. It's like he doesn't think I can handle it. Like I'm still a little kid. You're 13! There's nothing wrong with being a kid. Oh, you're all children, and none of you realize how good you have it. Back in the day, each and every one of you would be pulling 12-hour shifts in this exact mine. If it weren't for child labor laws, the 5 of you might have actual character. Exactly. Rosalina's not mature. She still sleeps with stuffed animals. That doesn't mean she's not mature. I still have a pork chop, you know? I rest my case. Wait, what did you say about child labor? Oh, lordy. I'm just gonna remain silent. This is not my fight. Yo, if Rosalina's house is haunted, we should break in and, like, ghost bust it or something. My god, Zane, you can't ghost bust if there's no ghost. Also, Rosalina lives there. She can't break into her own house, dummy. There's no ghost that you know of. I bet we could figure out how to bust it if it's actually real, and if it isn't real, well, problem solved. You know, Rosalina, you could always stay over at my house until Stella Ghost busts your place. We have a finished basement with a pull-out couch. Why are we talking about this like it's a thing? It's not a thing. There are no ghosts. I don't care, and I don't believe I've wasted this much time trying to argue with children. I'm washing my hands of this and calling the cops. Feel free to leave before they show up. You hear that, Miles? We're leaving. I suggest the rest of you kids leave this empty mine before someone gets black lung or gets crushed by rocks or meets any one of my of many terrible fates people tend to meet in abandoned mines. Oh no! I've brought everyone here and we're all gonna die! Kanika's interrupted by a pair of thunderous knocks. That wasn't me, I swear. Then what was it? Come on, Stella, didn't you have a whole list of perfectly natural explanations for scary mine noises? It's Tommyknockers, for sure. I know this was why we came down here, but we've got to check it out. Stella? I know, but weird stuff's been happening around here the past few days. What if this is our chance to get an actual solid lead? The stakes couldn't be higher. Do you have no sense of self-preservation? I want you out of here, Stella. Come on, Tabby, you can come along too. If you guys are going after something spooky, count me in. Are you kidding me? Tagging along with some olds to get jump scared by shadows and freak each other out? That's so lame. Whether or not it's lame is irrelevant. Nobody's going deeper into the mine. Nobody is staying in the mine. You're all leaving. Oh my god, the teens were right. I did get jump scared. Please listen to Tabitha before my heart gives out. It'll be fun, Neeks. It will not. Ugh. Wait a second. Where'd 3 of you run off to? Are you kidding me? Unbelievable. Wow, Kanika, maybe if you weren't still scared of the dark or whatever, you would have noticed them sneak off. I noticed them sneak off, and I've been zoning out the whole time you've been here. Oh, they must have squeezed through that child-sized tunnel. Oh no! Dang, I've always wondered where that goes. I've never been able to get these hips through there. Stella, stop sneaking into my mines. Please, I am literally begging you. If only all the tunnels down here were wide enough for adults, we could already be done with this little mess but no! There just have to be remnants from a bygone era. Didn't you just talk about how child labor was the good old days a minute ago? I was trying to get you to leave my mine. Becca's head pops out from the tunnel's entrance. We are not about to let you come in here and ruin our good time. The mine is safe. I've been here a million times. Yeah, if Becca says we're safe, then we're totally safe. Stop treating us like kids. Whatever. Come on, you two. I know a cool spot this way. Okay, I think I know where that tunnel rejoins the rest of the mines. I'll go look for them, and I want each and every one of you to take note of the fact that I'm doing that. Those idiots get themselves lost and die, I am not letting their families sue me into the ground. Are those really your priorities right now? Yeah, do you have a problem with that? I want the rest of you out of my mine! Except for you, Kayshurrr. I'm not letting you out of my sight. Yeah, sure, I could never fit in that tunnel anyways. You've crossed a barrier that I cannot, so my time here is up. But only because Stella promised me a ghost hunt tomorrow. Whatever, I still have to do my dailies anyways, and the service down here sucks. I will happily escort those 2 knuckleheads out. No, you are not about to weasel your way into this, Stella. Aw, come on, Tabby. I've been down here a ton. I can totally help out. Look at her face. She and Gretchen are the same. Except Gretchen is just concerned. Tabitha sighs. Ugh, there's no getting rid of you, is there? Fine, I won't waste my time arguing. I mean, do I have to come with you? Yes, you're safer with me than you are leaving with those 3. Thanks for the vote of confidence. Don't worry, Kayshurrr, it'll be fun and safe. Sure, that's exactly what you told her last night, and we all know how that ended. Tabitha, don't push Stella away like that. She hasn't done anything to deserve it. Ugh, not you two. I said she could tag along, didn't I? It's a big deal. Sorry, Kayshurrr. Tabby's just a bit of a curmudgeon. It's time to get mystical and weird. There's no way around it. I can feel the depths call out to us, and we are all destined to answer their call. Noted. Let's not linger any longer than we have to, shall we? Want me to take Gretchen with me? I don't know if it'll be easier to cover more ground without her. Yeah, that's probably for the best. I don't want a repeat of last night, and who knows if we'll have to do any climbing. Thank God! That's really all I want. Perfect time and place for wizard nonsense. Anytime I can potentially be ominous and, you know, spooky, let's fucking do it. And here in a cave, nonetheless. This is the only time I'm willing to part with Gretchen as well, because she will be safe outside. I'll see you on the other side. Hopefully soon. For sure, we won't be long. Like I said, we'll play for a little longer than what I have scheduled, because things are getting tense. Cool. Can't wait to bless some ghosts tomorrow. Kaneko, Miles, and Zane head towards the entrance of the mines, leaving you, Tabitha, and Stella to find the remaining teens. Alright, no dawdling. We should be able to catch up with them if we go this way. You and Stella exchange a glance as Tabitha ventures forward. As the three of you move deeper into the mine, you hear echoes of conversations bounce across the walls. Becca, why are you doing this again? I thought you thought Tabitha was, like, really cool. Why are you trying to get her all mad? Oh, we're doing this because Tabitha is really cool. She doesn't let anyone boss her around, so we can't just let her boss us around. Aw, you hear that, Tabby? Someone thinks you're cool. Can't believe she used to hang out with someone as lame as Stella. Oh. Hey, I don't know. I think Stella's kind of cool. Her videos are really neat. Oh, come on. She doesn't even have a sponsor. What kind of a YouTuber doesn't have a sponsor? I mean, not yet, but I'm in talks with Meat Rice, and I make plenty from ads and donations. How does it feel to have a teen girl think you're cool, Tabitha? Feel nothing about it. The opinions of children don't interest me. I don't know, you kind of hesitated there. You're reading into things that aren't there, Stella. Just because your livelihood revolves around what people think of you, doesn't mean that I care what people think of me. Congratulations on your sponsor, though. Yes, Tabitha! I need whatever is dividing you two to get fixed. Be friends again. Dang, Stella, Meat Rice? That's a big deal. They're on, like, every big podcast. Thank you, thank you. Feels like a really big step for the channel. I just wish Becca hadn't said all the things she's said tonight. She's just mean. It had nothing to do with you. You've seen how she's treated everyone tonight, except Tabitha. Yeah, I guess you're right. Surprised you don't have thicker skin about this, Stella. I can't even count the number of times you've rolled over my protestations in the past 2 days. Well, I know you don't mean it. Agree to disagree. They have nothing to say about me one way or the other. So we'll just press on. Alright, we're gonna fucking die! Another knock, closer, interrupts your thoughts. Followed by another. Followed by another. Is it just me, or is that knocking coming from the same direction as those kids? It's not just you. Okay, that knocking's starting to freak me out. Calm down, Rosalina. It's just mine sounds. Did you guys see that? No, it was just a shadow. There's no reason to get freaked out. I saw it. Shut up! There's nothing down here. Stop trying to scare me. Are you sure the tunnel they went through is going to meet back up with us? Yes, I'm familiar with all the old maps of this place. Should be a central chamber not too far from here, where everything joins back up. What did they see? Tommy knockers. It's not Tommy knockers. They're probably just jumping at their own shadows. You said it yourself, Stella. As soon as they get deeper into the mine, their bravado in the face of authority would vanish into a puff of smoke. It's probably just rocks falling somewhere deeper in the mine, which is also bad for obvious reasons. These poor kids. Lukey's getting jump scared now. I have no sympathies for their terror. They brought this upon themselves for trespassing in my mine and making me come down here. I'm sure they're just as upset that you came down here as you are. It's probably just... It's fine. Tunnel's just collapsing. Alright, we're getting closer. Let's just keep moving. As you progress deeper into the mine, the knocking grows more frequent. It's still distant, but it's much louder than before. I'm, like, genuinely anxious. Oh no. The tunnel ends abruptly in front of you. A century-old ladder is the only way forward. In the darkness beyond, you can still hear the youths, their panicked arguing echoing down the pitch-black corridors. The pit radiates rage, a white-hot anger. It calls to you, desperate to be witnessed, pulling you forward. And here we are. The tunnel they crawled through passes through the chamber below. Shouldn't be hard to find them once we get down there. I've never been this far in. Congratulations, Stella. You got what you wanted. Tabitha walks up to the ladder and disappears over its edge. It's gonna fucking break when we go down it. Alright, let's do this. Stella hoists herself over the edge and begins to climb down. You walk to the ladder and climb down, or it's gonna break when we have to go up it. I'm pretty sure this is the way back, I'm pretty sure this is the way back. Come on. Pretty sure? I thought you'd been down here before. Okay, maybe I didn't go this far in, but whatever, it doesn't matter. I definitely remember the way out. Hurry, I don't want to be down here anymore. I think it was actually this way. Oh, shut up! No one even wanted to, you to come this way, or come with us anyway. Becca! Yep, they're close alright. Good thing they're so damn loud. Sounds like they're really lost. The voices around you, those of the teens and your companions, sound odd, distant. There's something in the darkness before you that's much louder, though you don't hear it, but you can feel it in your chest, like the deep growl of a predator. You find yourself stepping towards the black chamber before you, compelled by some unnatural force. Hey, are you alright, Kayshurrr? What do you think you're doing? Get away from there! Cousin dives towards you, but not before the light from your phone illuminates the chamber. You said we wouldn't use the shipment! You know it's compromised! We couldn't afford to wait on new wood, Charles. We had to go ahead with it. Oh no! It's still sturdy enough. It'll get the job done. Kayshurrr? Kayshurrr, are you alright? Oh, thank God you're alive. Looked like you had a seizure or something, and then you and Tabby just conked out. I'm fine. Ugh. You can barely open your eyes. You're not fine. Neither of you move a muscle. I don't want you straining yourselves while you're still recovering from whatever that was. I'm gonna get you both some help. I'll be back soon, I promise. Don't die on me, alright? Feed back out of consciousness as your companion clambers out of the pit, intent on your rescue. I don't like it! You raise up on your elbows, head still swimming from the visions, your surroundings coming back into focus. Your head throbs as the knocking continues, now magnitudes more intense than ever. Through it, you once again hear the panicked voices of bickering teenagers echoing down the stone corridors. Becca, you're just getting us more lost. It's this way. If you're so sure, then why don't you just leave? I can't believe I let Alexis talk me into inviting you in the first place. Becca, I'm just trying to help. I said go! Okay, I will! Alexis, you don't have to go with her. You know that, right? Pick a side, Alexis! I'm sure Becca knows where we're going. She wouldn't just lie. Sorry, Rosalina. Tell him to follow the left-hand wall! Just pick a wall and roll with it. The increasingly desperate voices of the teens are drowned out by the thunderous knocking. You can practically feel the ground shake beneath you. Can almost see the walls vibrate with the intensity of the hellish sound. God, that knocking is not helping my headache. What the hell just happened? Again, gotta be mystical and weird. Both of us were shown the dark truth of this place, the sins that were committed, and the deaths that followed. There's gotta be fumes or something down here. It's an old mine. These places are death traps. Probably just hallucinated. So you're not denying that you saw it! Are you literally gaslighting me? I said I saw it too. Stop being weird. We're leaving. Rosalina! Rosalina appears in the passageway to your left. She's out of breath and it looks like she's been crying. She fell at the left-hand wall! Also, we've got Rosalina. We can leave. Becca's kind of a bitch anyway, so like, you know. It's fine. I'm so sorry I snuck off like that. I just wanted Alexis to think I was cool. The entire cavern shakes with the sound of rockfall. I don't know what the hell is up with this knocking, but that is the sound of a mine collapse. Quick, up that ladder, both of you. Well, wait, Becca and Alexis are still down there. You can't just leave them here. I know which way they're going. They'll listen to you this time, I promise. Do you have a death wish, little girl? No, but they don't want to die either. Please. So I'm of the mind that we just take Rosalina and go. But if we go after Becca and Alexis, I'm sure we're gonna see something spooky. And I'm very intrigued about spooky. Thoughts? Opinions? This is rough! Like... I also feel like Rosalina's gonna hate us if we, like, abandon her friends. But Tabitha's gonna be mad! Whatever, we'll go get him. We'll go get him. I want to see something spooky. Okay, let's do it. Kayshurrr, don't do this to me. They're kids, Tabitha. I'm not going to leave them down here. Are you serious? Thank you! They're back this way! Hurry! Rosalina runs back the way she came. I'm sorry, Tabitha! Run after her. The mines shake with each... She came with us! She didn't have to come with us. The mines shake with each new thunderous blow as bits of rock and dust shake off the ceiling and scatter on the floor around you. Rosalina leads the way, and Tabitha isn't far behind you. I thought you knew the way out. I thought we'd be down here a million times already. I was making it up, okay? I swear to God, Kayshurrr, if we get stuck down here... Surprised you didn't run off. Don't make me change my mind. We're coming! Just stay where you are! Rosalina, you came back! I don't want to die down here! Just grab them and start running! Reach forward and forcefully grab Becca and Alexis, silently pulling them behind you. You quickly push your way back the way you came, pieces of fallen rock littering the path around you. All of you start climbing. Now! Once the last teen is up, Tabitha grabs onto the ladder and starts climbing. Oh god. You follow suit and start climbing. I am shocked it didn't break, honestly. This way, come on. Your cousin moves with the kind of swiftness you'd expect from someone who's spent her entire working life in and around coal mines. Why couldn't you even just listen to someone other than yourself, Becca? I'm sorry, okay? God! You push forward, your burning muscles giving way to pure adrenaline. To your horror, you can see cracks forming on the walls of the tunnel. Come on, we've got to go faster! We're almost there! I can see the entrance! Your surroundings quake from another collapse. This one magnitude's more intense than the one you heard down in the pit. And then the knocking fades, and you feel safe, having arrived at the entrance in one piece. Well... What the fuck? What the fuck? Rosalina, are you okay? Clearly she's not okay, idiot! Shut up, Becca! It was your idea to go down there in the first place. This is your fault! Shit, fuck! Why did this have to happen? Okay, the knocking stopped at least. All of you stay exactly where you are. I'm gonna make some calls. Oh god, at least she's alive. This really hurts. Stella and Kanika pop their heads through the mine entrance. Oh, and there's Gretchen! Tabitha just stormed out of there. Are you... Oh my god. Rosalina, can you hear me? We're gonna get you out of here, okay? Stella already called an ambulance. But that means cops are gonna come. They're gonna know I was drinking. They're gonna know we went in there to drink, right? Becca, that doesn't matter. If my dad finds out, he'll kill me. He can't know. In a panic, Becca runs for the entrance and pushes her way through. Oh, look, Gretchen is here to make a butter. Don't worry about her, Rosalina. She's being an asshole. One of us should wait by the gate to make sure they can find us up here. I should check in with Tabby, see if she needs help. We're gonna get you help. Everything's gonna be okay. Right, I'll go down to the gate. Rosalina, I'm so sorry. I'll be back soon. We're gonna get you out of here. You're gonna be just fine, okay? Kayshurrr and Alexis will keep you safe until then. Am I gonna die? Rosalina, don't say things like that. Oh, do I want to go spooky or street? I'll be street smart. I don't want to scare the kid. No way. I've seen people bounce back from worse. Thanks, Kayshurrr. Rosalina's breath comes in quick, irregular bursts. If I don't make it, tell my dad I'm sorry. I'm the one who has something to be sorry about. This is all me and Becca's fault. We never should have gone down into that stupid mine. It's not your fault. I went down there because I wanted to. Rosalina pauses, catching her breath. Thank you, Kayshurrr. I'm glad everyone else made it out okay. Couldn't have done it without your help. You should stop hanging out with Becca. What are you trying to do? Make this some sort of after-school special? She's probably right, though. If I were just smart and brave like you, I wouldn't have let Becca drag me around down there. And you wouldn't have had to go after us. And then you wouldn't be... You're the nicest person I know, Rosalina. This just isn't fair. Rosalina? Can you hear me? Yeah, still awake. Just hurts like hell. Sorry, I shouldn't be pushing you to talk. I'll just hold your hand until they come back with help, okay? Alexis grasps Rosalina's hand. Tears streak down both of their cheeks as you sit in silence together, waiting for the long, anxious moments to pass before help arrives. Some of my men are on the way with rock lifts. We'll get you out of here soon. It's gonna be okay, Rosalina. Everything's gonna be just fine. They're over here, Earl. Jesus H. Christ, you weren't kidding about the emergency. It'll still be a bit for the ambulance. Nearest depot's over in Brevard, so it'll be at least another half hour. Jesus fuck! You heard the man. You have half an hour to get her out of there. Move it! Rosalina? Sweetie? I'm here! Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You don't have to be sorry. It's okay. We're all here. You can hang on, Rosalina. I know you can. Excuse you. Tabitha's men quickly get to work and manage to pull Rosalina out from the rubble just as the ambulance arrives. Dear God. Sir, I'm afraid there's no space in the back. What do you mean? I can't ride with her? You're better off driving behind us. We're headed to Brevard, so it's quite a ways. Is she gonna be okay? She's gonna make it, right? Please, God. Yes, sir. I promise you, we're gonna do everything we can to keep her stable. Her vitals are looking good. Rosalina, my poor baby. I'll be there as fast as I can, okay? I promise you won't be alone. I love you, Dad. The paramedics load Rosalina into the back of the ambulance and drive off. Oscar approaches you off to the side as the police talk to Tabitha and her men. What the hell happened in there? Did we get all spooky? At least nobody died. That's true, but it doesn't answer my question. The seams of reality grow weak in this town. Nobody is safe. Ominous, but not helpful. What Kayshurr's trying to say is that Tommy knockers brought down the mine. I can't believe they're actually real, but I got some footage of the knocking on my phone. They must have been furious that we went down there. Doesn't matter what caused it. I'm just sorry it happened, Oscar. This is all my fault. She's been so angry with me. If I'd just been able to provide more stability, she wouldn't be doing things like this, putting herself in danger. I'm sure she thinks I'm making things up about our house being haunted, but I've seen things I can't explain, and it's only gotten worse over time. She told us about it down in the mine. For what it's worth, I believe you. No comment, but after tonight, I don't know. Once you're back from the hospital, we can check it out for you. Thanks, Stella. That means a lot. I've gotta go. Mr. Gutierrez, is it okay if I come too? I want to be there for her. Of course, Alexis. It'll be good for her to see a friendly face. The two of them head over to Oscar's car and drive off. Do you think Rosalina's gonna be okay? Paramedics said she was stable. She's a tough kid. She'll be okay. Can't believe you left us down there. No, I got it. I understood. Something's telling me that this is only the beginning of our ditchling problem. Now that you mention it, Kanika's mom said that the numbers we saw in the woods were a big deal. Nobody even died here tonight, and I feel like we're left with even more questions than we had this morning. We had a lot of questions this morning. But hey, maybe we just averted whatever disaster they were here to predict, though. This is also a little too magic for me. Just because two bad things have happened here, just because two bad things have happened doesn't mean there's a pattern, right? There was a stone carving on the wall of that pit. Gave me some sort of vision. I saw what happened to this place. The Scarlets caused the old collapse. Charles Shaw was set up. No way, dude was a monster. I mean, the Scarlets were monsters too. They still are. What am I saying? I don't believe in visions. Whatever you saw was probably just auto-suggestion. I don't know, Neeks. You weren't down there. Kayshurrr and Tabby had, like, simultaneous seizures next to a creepy stone carving. It's like something out of a movie. Just because they passed out or had seizures doesn't mean it wasn't auto-suggestion. Great. I'm pretty sure Tabitha and I saw some ghosts down there. They were right behind you right before you left, and they followed us when we went after Becca and Alexis. Did you not see them? Well, I didn't see anything other than the two of you in that carving. That's super weird. I don't want to doubt what you experienced, but you were deep in a dark abandoned coal mine. You might have just been primed to see things. You know, now that I think about it, that totally fits the profile for some of the Tommyknocker stories. What if they're actual bona fide ghosts? Stella... everything that happened down there centered around that main chamber, where I saw that carving. Stella showed me a photo. Weird stuff. Maybe you weren't entirely off base about the cult stuff you mentioned earlier today, but this thing felt old. Are you sure those were Tommyknockers? Depends on what you mean by sure. Is anyone really sure of anything? They fit the description pretty well, and I don't know what else they'd be. I have no idea what happened in there. I need to do some reading on mind collapses, I guess. What happens now? What happens now? We go home. Oh, hold on a minute, Miss Scarlet. Mind if we have a quick word with your cousin, miss? In private? Okay, fine. Just make it quick, and don't you dare try and pull anything on her. She did nothing wrong here. Ladies, I'm afraid that means you too. Don't you need to talk to us? We witnessed this too. Oh, sure, but that can wait. We know where to find y'all. I swear to God, if they bring up the death from yesterday. I'm Sheriff Hugby, and this is Deputy Derrickson, but you can call me Earl. Please make your acquaintance. Welcome to Scarlet Hollow. Hope this little accident has colored your perception of the place. Lovely place to live, if you ask me. Lovely indeed. Now, Sheriff Hugby, don't you think it's a mite odd that these teens found themselves in an old abandoned mine on the very property Kayshurr's family happens to own? I keep hearing a breathing in the music track, and it's making me very uncomfortable. Just need to point that out real quick. And don't you think it's even a mite bit odder that Kayshurr happened to be in there with them at the time of said collapse? Be lying if I said it weren't peculiar, though I'm sure you're an upright citizen, Kayshurr, and all this is surely an unfortunate coincidence. I don't like your tone, officers. If y'all don't have anything, if you don't have a warrant, if you don't have any suspicions about me, get the fuck out of my face. Still, good cop should ask themselves these questions. Fuck off. You're out of your depths here. I don't even give a shit about the street smart one. Just gonna leave it at that. If I were a worse cop, I'd take offense to that statement, but I'm gonna do you a favor and write it off as shock. Fucking fight me. Perhaps it'd be best to touch base in the morning, see where your head's at after you've gotten some rest. We'll tell you the exact same fucking thing. From here on out, Kayshurrr, you should do your best to stay out of trouble. There's plenty to do around here that isn't spelunking around unstable mines. I won't want to see you or any of on any of our other calls this week. Have a good one, Kayshurrr. Anyway, Deputy Derrickson tips his hat to you. The two officers wander back towards the mine, Derrickson taking notes as they examine the scene. Literally, there were at least 2 other people, 3 if you're counting Tabitha, who were down there with us. Hop off my cock. You make your way back towards Stella and Kanika. I just can't believe 2 nights in a row. Is it my fault, Neeks? Stella, no. This is all just an awful coincidence. It's not your fault. Oh, hey, guess the cops are done with you? What are they gonna, what? Are they gonna take you in for, being present at an accident? Sorry if they gave you a hard time. Small town cops, you know. I think you just mean cops. Always blame everything on drifters. Even acts of God, I guess. Excellent, you didn't get arrested. Now come on, let's get back to the estate. I'd like to get some rest before I have to deal with the fallout of everything that happened tonight. I'll see you tomorrow, okay, Kayshurrr? Excuse me, Just stop trying to get my cousin killed, Stella. Come on, let's go. Tabitha starts walking to her car, pulling you by your arm. I'll text you when we're back. Tabitha doesn't say a word as the car cuts along the darkened road. We try to keep an eye on the surrounding wilderness as she drives, wary of what may lurk behind the tree line. How are you holding up? Poorly, but I'd really rather we didn't get into it. Why do you treat Stella like that? Didn't you two used to be friends? It was a different time in my life. I just wish she'd get that we're not in high school anymore. A different person than whoever she thinks she knows. You and Kanika really don't seem to get along. She pushes my buttons. Is there some kind of history there, or... No. No, quit talking. I need to focus on the road. Sorry about today. Tabitha doesn't answer. Sorry for apologizing? Am I talking too much, or... At least you called. At least I called! You girl! Okay. Poor Rosalina. Poor Oscar. Should have kept tighter reins on that girl. I never got into any trouble like this when I was a teen, and I have Pearl Ann to thank for that. Hated it at the time, but that strictness paid off. Ugh, what am I telling you this for? Oh, whoa, are we bonding? I guess? Sure. At least in Rosalina and Oscar's case, I don't think the parents are to blame here. I'll just remain silent. Gotta focus on the road. Your eyes wander back to the tree line as you and Tabitha slink back into silence. Time to eat some mac and cheese? You once again cross the threshold into the estate, the musty stench of the decaying mansion greeting you with its undertones of mildew and wood rot. Well, this day was a lot more stressful than it needed to be, and I'm sure it's the precursor to a horrifically stressful week. I'm going to bed. I suggest you do the same. Thanks for calling me about those kids, by the way. It was unexpected. You could have... No, you should have waited for me. Too tired to argue. See you in the morning. Tabitha turns and makes her way up the stairs, her posture defeated. Turn in. Head up to your room to turn in. You collapse at Tabitha's dusty guest bed, your head empty of thoughts. After your time in the Shaw mine, you barely even notice the dust. Phone buzzes on the table. Y'all, these are those things, right? Kanika sends a picture of a pair of ditchlings by the side of the road. I saw them again too. Another picture, this time of them staring from a tree. What the fuck? These things are definitely not hairless monkeys or raccoons or whatever. I don't know what the hell they are. I guess there's more to them being here than the mine collapse. No way I'm sleeping tonight. You think about looking out the guest room window, but at this point you're too exhausted to leave your bed. The adrenaline from this evening is finally wearing off, replaced by a creeping exhaustion that threatens to overwhelm you. Your limbs feel heavy, your eyelids slipping down over your eyes, even as you stare down with dread at the ominous pictures on your phone. If it weren't for the pit of dread balling in your stomach, you would almost feel comfortable as you settle in between the covers, your tired bones sinking into the decrepit mattress. When you close your eyes, you see Rosalina's face twisted with pain, staring up at you with tear-streaked cheeks. Trapped by powers beyond her control, terrified of what her now uncertain future would hold. Your eyes shoot back open, your heart pounding as the door to your room swings open. I've been chosen! Just the cat. It's always just the cat. It's nice to see another living being, even one as unfriendly as Tabitha's cat. The comfort of her presence sets your mind at ease, and you finally slip into a deep sleep. Oh no. Another cool outro video. Tabitha? Well, that's not great. It's the end of episode 2. Episode 3 is currently slated for late 2021, early 2022. We'll be sure to update you once we have a firmer release date. Please save your game now. I can do that. we go. That's the second episode of Scarlet Hollow. Game very good indeed. Game very good indeed. I'll say the first one definitely scared me more, but I'm still extremely intrigued and loved the fact that, like, we've added more mystery to it. And we've got to meet a lot more characters, which is awesome. And just everything. It's perfect. The whole thing is perfect, and I'm very excited. And this project, I need it all done. I need it all done so that I can play more and understand more. But we will continue the series as it releases. You liked this one better than the first one? I like it because it's more established. Like, you've got the background of everything. I think they did a really great job with the first episode as far as, like, getting you engaged with the story. This one's definitely more polished, but it's very good. And I need to go back and play the first chapter again and try and do some of the other, or like choose differently than I did before. But I love this. I love this game. It's a very well put together visual novel. I think there were more grammatical errors this time around than there were the first time. But like I said, it just came out last week, and I know that they've been not rushing, but have been trying to like work at getting this out as soon as possible, because they already had a couple of delays with COVID and everything. But it's here, and I'm here for them taking their time and making it a perfect thing. Yeah, like, I mean, the quality of the writing is fantastic. I'm totally fine with, like, having a couple of, you know, grammatical errors here and there. It didn't make the thing unreadable. It just caught me off guard a couple of times. We've done a couple games on this channel that the errors made it unreadable and the writing was just terrible in general, but this is so engaging. I guess it just stood out more because I'd be like so into it, and then it's like, wait, why does the sentence not make sense? And it's, oh, because we did it bad. Yeah, they'll iron those out. It does not really affect everything. That's my only complaint, though, and it's not even that big of an issue. So yeah, that's Scarlet Hollow. I'm super happy with it, and like, I'm very excited for the next chapters whenever they end up releasing them. As per usual, I think everyone here knows about it, has it, or is about to get it. But if you want to check out the game and play it yourself, or support the devs, or do whatever, there's a game link. Oh my god, hiccups. But yeah, I guess we'll end it here. Let's go ahead and find a channel to raid. Who do we got online? I'm glad we didn't go too much over time. I didn't think it would be super duper long, but it was also a lot shorter than anticipated initially. Let's go hang out with... Play Me Out. Got some Pokemon Mystery Dungeon. Good, nice kind of chill game, I suppose. After having some spooky stuff. Yeah. So we'll go hang out with them for a little bit. We'll be back. Today is Sunday, right? Yeah. We'll be back tomorrow with some more Bloodborne. I'm thinking about adding a couple of streams earlier in the days on Mondays and Wednesdays. I haven't gotten anything set up for that just yet, but I'll let everyone know when I decide what to do for that. Also thinking about having another series like during the weekdays, so it's not just Bloodborne all the time, because it will take us a while to get through it. But yeah, we'll figure all that out later. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Have a great night. Rest well. Go say hi to our friends at Play Me Out. And take care. We'll see you next time. Bye!